Pro heroes. Midoriya tried to explore around a bit, make sure he got his facts straight. Sleepy was tearing up a bit but nodded. You live with your aunt now, right? Quote. Yeah, but she's a pro too. So are all of her friends. Sleepy didn't seem to like that. He might not feel as alone if he was with a non-hero family, but he seemed to expect his new family to leave just like his first one did. Not a good mindset. What, you're worried that all your family is gonna leave? Midoriya kept probing and trying to confirm what he thought. He wasn't helping anyone if he was barking up the wrong tree, so might as well get his facts checked. Quote. No, he definitely was. Listen man, listen, you've already been told your parents wanted the best for you, haven't you? That this time it'll be different. He rolled onto his back again, adjusting his backpack of rocks. He glanced at the nodding kid, who probably wanted to hear that everything would be fine but couldn't believe it anymore. Who knew they installed mirrors in this place? Quote. It won't. He could feel Sleepy's gaze on his head as he worked, trying to go as low as possible to confirm what Sleepy was already thinking. You got left behind, people die and the world moves on. But, it doesn't have to, Sleepy. He smiled as his brain worked a mile a minute. He hadn't really said anything positive or helpful, he was just sort of bashing Sleepy's dreams more so far. He probably should have thought this out before he opened his mouth. It was time to stop agreeing with Sleepy's perception and add his own twist. The world can change, and real heroes are the ones who change it. Real heroes save people, even if it kills them, because they care about them. Real heroes stop villains even if it kills them so people like you and me can keep on living because they care about us. It wasn't the best, hell it wasn't even good, but it was a speech. He tried and was now certain he should have said nothing. He said earlier that there was no harm in trying, but he was wrong. This was way worse than not trying. Quote. My parents. Sleepy sniffed, seeming to be on the verge of tears after Midoriya fucked everything up. Quote. Are you saying my parents died because they care about me? Midoriya smirked at that one. Well, that depends kid. The man twisted slightly, looking the child in the eye. Are you saying your parents were real heroes? Well, that was pretty stupid. Time for his exit, he fucked everything up enough. See ya next time Sleepy. He rolled to his feet and took this time to bail, not even giving a glance back. He needed to do some research on how to talk to people and write speeches before he ever tried some shit like that again. He hurried back to his club room and got to dismantling everything, trying very hard and failing even harder to not think about the cringy lines he said. At least taking this apart was relaxing, it gave him something to focus on. He had to check what he could rip apart and what needed to be in prime condition. The good news was that all the parts he got weren't actually that expensive, there was just a lot of small things. Magnets, wiring, casing, it all came together to make the AEC slowly grow from a lump with a handle into a real gun. But he didn't want a gun, he wanted a cannon. By the end of the day, he had finished most of the repairs he could to the gun, but his pride was beyond salvageable. He swore that not only would he get that stupid hunk of metal working, but he'd also buy a book on giving speeches and study the shit out of it so he never fucked up that badly again. With a hole in his pride and very sore legs, he trudged home. He had a lot of work to do to set up for the Friday thing, but he needed to get the AEC done quickly. That meant he'd need to find a certain gun expert who wouldn't ask any questions. He'd sweep by the gun shops on Thursday and try to find Mao actually, he should probably go to Mao first. They might go back to some of the gun shops again if he went to them first. He swept through his home, happy to eat a free meal, and prepared for bed. He never seemed to get easy days. He'd kill for a little bit of rest these days. He woke up bright and early since the hardest part of the day might have been tracking down Mao. Might have been, at least, once he thought of a method that might work. He hadn't been in one place for a while, and Mao seemed to pay attention to Ronin, so if he switched costumes and made a ton of noise, Mao should come to him. That would explain why he was walking down the street, showing off that shiny sword on his hip as he moved to the next hideout. He didn't have any work planned, it was supposed to be all gang hunting until he found Mao, and the best way to do that was to make a scene. He nodded to people on the street, his left hand firmly on Yamato's saya and his thumb pushing the tsuba, pushing just an inch of the blade out before letting it fall back in. His right hand swung freely. All in all, it was a good time. He nodded at the fake heroes and got a kick out of their reactions. Most assumed he was another hero, just by his casual walk and the way he greeted civilians. His calm nature didn't make him seem like a villain, since what villain waved hello to heroes and exchanged small talk with old ladies? Well, a smart or confident one, but that wasn't the point. It helped him, so no point in questioning how stupid the fakes were. It seemed most people forgot what Ronin looked like for some reason. Most people probably knew the name, but it wasn't like he was always active. Villains were famous for their mugshots and crime lists, but Ronin didn't seem to have any because his mask looked so generic and all his crimes were the same three: theft, battery, and trespassing. Didn't matter to him. Made his job easier, like the days when everyone thought Ronin was just a guy high out of his mind on cocaine. Now, he had to work fear instead of ignorance. He already had before, making people jumpy as their numbers dwindled to something in the shadow, but he still preferred the easy batting of nobody taking him seriously. After all, these schmucks never knew the difference. It was the heroes' opinions and reactions to him that had changed. He'd have to do this quickly to avoid the heroes, but loud enough to attract Mao, however many buildings that took. The number didn't matter, they needed to go down anyway. The heroes knew about these places too but were sitting on their asses and watching. Pissed him right off. He walked past his first stop, smiling. He had guns blazing so many times, he hadn't gotten to do anything stealthy in a while. This was where he shined, and it was time to get started. No more crappily aimed shots or bad speeches to kids. This was what Ronin was good at, good old-fashioned stealth. Ronin moved around the building twice, eyeing it all down. Lots of boarded-up windows, metal doors to block off, people moving around to avoid. The speed of his fidgeting with Yamato slowly sped up. He was getting excited, this would be fun. Chapter and notes. Yo yagati yo. Short chapter because. Not sure. I'm lazy, and the tone will be a lot more consistent in the next part, so there's no reason in switching the tone again in this chapter. It seemed a good place to make a segment, by cutting it a little early. Next chapter we go back to Ronin's roots, and to ripping off Metal Gear. I thought, and then my head hurt because I never think, so I decided to reflect and ramble about tone. Tone shifts can be fine, they can be fantastic and enrich a story while ensnaring the readers. A big problem is that tone shifts aren't usually done well, and either it feels like you started reading a different story or the surprise moment is so easy to see coming you could practically write the moment before you read it. The tone itself is just the mood of the story, and that mood is projected in a lot of ways. The events happening, the way they're described, the way the characters react. Tone shift is just when we switch from one mood to another, and most aren't big events. A big fight scene will have a more tense tone than the celebrations that come after unless it was a bitter victory, but the tone shift isn't that noticeable. Most of the time, the tone is one of those things where if you notice it, something's wrong, like if you should be feeling sad but no one's taking something seriously, or if everyone's acting like teenagers and treating something with more gravity than it deserves. Tone shifts are like jokes, the delivery is everything. A choppy switch can make a pretty natural emotion feel out of place, while a great switch can make a strange emotion that most people wouldn't think of feel right, or at least make sense for the characters to feel. You might have won the war, but your brother just died, so your tone isn't going to be victorious. This writing advice doesn't pan that well into this chapter, but there's a lot of tone shifts. I also took all this time to say that Midoriya's speech to Kodo was a little choppy, and some of that was intentional. One of them is 5, and the other spends his time beating up people. Neither has great social skills. It still wasn't great and gave off a bit of an awkward tone, but hopefully it didn't come off as too comedic. That's all for now, soon a more focused chapter will be coming out. Adios. Chapter 79. Chapter Summary. Ronin returns, ready rambunctiously. Really? Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. He slunk around the outside of the building, eyeing each target and picking which order to tackle them from. What communications they had, who had weapons, where they could run to. If this was like last time, there would be heroes around here somewhere waiting for the crooks to do something. That meant he could skip over the outside guards and go straight for the center, and there was no better place to start for that than the place that would force them to run outside. The top. He didn't care who got the credit for the takedowns, he just needed to let Mao know he was a part of this. The heroes wouldn't mention him, so he'd have to force people to become aware of him. Not at the start, that'd get in his way while raiding this building. Before he left, though, he'd need to give a sign. That shouldn't be too hard. Ronin drew a line through the roof, then listened through it. He could hear people talking inside, and as he waited, slowly worked out that there were at least 6. Using one of his gloves, he blurred the smoky line, making it from a crisp line to a big smear that he could look through. He stuck his head through, looking around the room. 4 people were in the room, and 3 more were moving around outside of it. There were multiple exits, but he couldn't hear anyone through the others. Ronin pulled back, releasing the first peephole and creating a new one above a new room, then listened through it. When he was confident he couldn't hear anyone, he stuck his head in, then the rest of his body. There wasn't so much as a tap as he climbed through the hole he made, dropping and rolling onto the floor. He listened through the doorway, then drew Cupid and shot the far wall, withdrawing and hiding again. The talking stopped for a moment, and one of the men was sent in. He moved through the doorway, just a foot from Ronin's crouched form, and looked around slowly. A beer can had fallen over. Somebody's beer tower did a little tip. Shiro. Seriously, what the hell? Stop stacking so much shit and throw it away. He went back out of the room, and after the group glanced at him for a second, their attention turned to one of the people, presumably Shiro. They didn't notice the second figure moving closer behind the investigator with a hand on his sword, preparing for a drawing cut. Hey, I would if you could bother to throw out the shink. The sword flew from its sheath as Ronin exploded forward, within 5 feet of everyone in the room. The first to go down was the man in front of him, Ronin using a front kick to force his knee out and bring him down while his sword rose, striking him in the back of the skull, right above his neck. He crumpled like a sheet while Ronin moved forward around the table, turning his drawing cut into an overhead slash. Yamato struck the next man on the arms as he tried to block, but powered through his guard and still hit his head. He was dazed, but Ronin drew the sword back up and brought it back down on his head again, the man's knees giving way as he fell to the floor. Ronin kicked off his slumping body, moving across the table and kicking up papers and cups at the face of one of the remaining targets. The third man had stepped back and snarled, leaning his face forward right as papers and drinks struck him, forcing him to close his eyes. Ronin jumped off the table and hit him in the forehead with his pommel, then draped his arms around the man's neck and kneed him in the stomach twice before letting go with a headbutt. He fell like a sack of rocks while Ronin turned, dashing with sword drawn and cutting sideways. His feet planted, hips turned over feet, shoulders moved over his hips, and his lead arm straightened like swinging a baseball bat. That swing hit the retreating fourth in the leg, Yamato cutting his leg off and leaving a white wound. The man fell to the ground, too surprised to scream as he tried to step on a leg that was no longer there. Ronin didn't bother with a second sword swing, stomping his head further into the ground and leaping off and out of the room. The 3 men outside had heard something was wrong, and 2 looked into the room. They had started to move back as Ronin pounced forward, cutting off both their heads and cutting through some of the door frame. He spun, sweeping their bodies' legs and then charging the final victim. His last victim screamed as the sword rose, cutting him cleanly in 2. You could see the confusion on his face when he realized he didn't die, but his 2 halves began to slip away from each other. He tried to pull himself together as the flat of the sword struck the side of his head, knocking him out. Ronin went back, knocking out the other 2 victims before releasing Yamato, and returning all the cuts to smoke in the breeze. There was no sign of any cuts, other than the horror tales these criminals would tell when in prison. But that wasn't his worry. Ronin moved downward, ready to continue his work. Heroes watched as men ran screaming from their hideout, utterly confused. That's the signal, but what's happening? Is it safe to go in there? Maybe they accidentally armed the bomb. The heroes knew the story of Yukio and Ranger's standoff, and most of the hideouts seemed rigged to blow. Possibly an order from on top to try and destroy evidence, but with Ranger on the scene, it hadn't worked once. However, did Ranger show up? I didn't hear him. Heroes worked to quickly take down the fleeing criminals, but the criminals were seriously scared. But Ranger's shotgun still couldn't be heard, only screams from inside the building. Gradually, the flow out of the building slowed down. A single large man lurched out, taking advantage that civilians were frozen by the confusion and grabbing a nearby man as a hostage. Hey, I got a hostage. Don't you move or else. The voice was as calm as a stream and steady as a mountain. It wasn't loud but carried a great deal of weight as the figure exited the building. His coat flitted about in the breeze as he tossed his 39th victim to the side. The light glinted off his helmet, outlining just how emotionless he looked. He spun Yamato once, getting some liquid off of it and splattering it on the ground. I ain't scared of you. His muscles bulged as he began to strange his hostage, leaning forward only 20 feet from Ronin. Some heroes were closer, but no one was moving until. SS is chick. The sword flicked as he closed the distance, cutting the man's arm off at the shoulder. Are you done talking yet? The arm fell to the ground and the man stepped back, grabbing at his shoulder before screaming as the hostage bolted, also screaming. After the hostage moved out of the way, his sword danced, chopping off one of the man's legs so he couldn't escape and then slamming the pommel into his temple, then hit it again with the flat of the blade. He crumpled like wet newspaper. Quote. Glad you heroes were here. Someone might have gotten hurt if you weren't. Mao. His voice was thick with sarcasm as he looked over the scene, spinning his sword around with one hand while taking everything in. The rounded up criminals, the bomb squad going into the building, the heroes who started remember their jobs and surrounded him. Freeze Ronin, he didn't have time to lecture them on their sloppy reaction time. How did they pass their hero exams, let alone graduate when they were this bad? What did they teach in those fancy hero schools? He didn't bother to give a snappy one-liner, just cutting through the ground and falling into the sewers, then hitting the release button. All the injuries Yamato had inflicted faded away, and the dismembered parts would become whole. He already knew his next target. Yamato began to cut space in half as they moved together, the living weapon and the weapon made from the once living. They had a lot more places to bust before they were done. The second went down even faster, and he got to hear the members talking about him and his takedown while slamming a goon headfirst into a sink. There was just less at the second, less building, less people, less time spent overall. He shouted Mao's name before he left, then sunk through the floor again. He really thought they would start preparing something in the sewers to deal with him, but it wasn't a bureaucracy unless everything took years longer than it should have. Now, he was in the third basement, sitting in the rafters and waiting for the guards to move. They were only aware of one of his raids here, and he was impressed with their information network. It seemed they were still talking about the first raid, though. The second raid seemed too small to be important. He adjusted his stance and entered a controlled fall, landing on one of the guards and driving him headfirst into a wall before kicking off his body like a starting platform, drawing his sword and cutting the next man cleanly through both arms at the bicep and his chest, leaving his body defenseless except his legs. Ronin wasn't interested in the body though and just shoved the body over while he kicked the head repeatedly. The body spasmed twice before the eyes lost focus, slipping into unconsciousness. He looked over the victims who didn't even see him, all tied up and gagged. If nothing else, this gang was very organized. They were informed when one gang went down, had a large number of bombs set up at most hideouts, and had a single method for tying up their victims. Made it easy to untie them when you got used to it, and some rescue workers were well on their way to getting their not-merit badge because of his work breaking and exiting, leaving the rescue workers to clean up his mess. He crouched slightly, turning on his heel and drawing his sword again, cutting another man in half. Yamato made strength irrelevant, all he needed was speed to cut down punks like this. His latest victim had tried to get the jump on him since he was blocking the way to the upstairs. Yamato danced, Ronin's two-handed grip elegantly slicing through any attempts to fight back. After dicing, he slammed the blunt of the sword into his newest victim and breathed in. He held his breath, eyes scanning the scene as he stepped back, sword ready for a new target. Only after looking around and making sure no one else was coming for him did he sheath Yamato, letting the wounds fade into just painful memories for his new unwilling training dummies. It was always weird to watch them piece themselves together, but that was probably because he hadn't done it a lot. If this was his quirk from birth, he wouldn't think twice about it. If this was his quirk from birth, he probably never would have thought to try and apply it this way. Ronin looked over the three men, judging the size of this place. 3 guards in the basement wasn't much, but with this many people getting ready to be shipped off, it seemed pretty big. Maybe most of the people were upstairs. And speak of the devil. He heard the steps of someone coming straight to him and punted his victims out of sight. His thumb played with the Suba, eager for one more drawing cut and to see just how many of these fuckers he could dice up. He was starting to like this. Maruko couldn't be more excited when she got called in to deal with the schmucks running some trafficking ring, right until she found out they were going to be sitting back and waiting. Not her style at all, especially when she was sure she could just go in and beat the shit out of everyone. Those bitches couldn't even use their own bombs right, they were as scary as a toddler with a knife. All they could do was hurt themselves. Then she heard that today something was different. They wouldn't be seeing that new vigilante, stranger or something. He had returned and was carving up a storm. Even better, his path was headed toward the base she was stuck at. After she transferred, so she might have just shouted at a different hero to switch spots with her. Now, he was coming after taking down his 5th gang today. He was moving in a clear path, barely hiding. It wasn't a matter of where, but when. Sooner or later, he'd come to this dump and carve them up, then she'd come to him and beat him flat. She hated having loose ends or regrets, and Ronin's constant one-upmanship was pissing her off. He had even disappeared for a while so she couldn't get even, but now. Ronin was back, and she'd make sure she got a chance to fight him and get the last win. It wasn't the first hit that won the fight, but the last one. Ronin emerged inside the building through the wall through the 2nd floor, hiding underneath the table and moving slowly. He tried to never attack the same floor he entered, so they wouldn't be sure how or when he got inside. He did attack the same floor a few times, but that was to mix things up. Didn't want to get formulaic, he was trying to avoid being predictable. From underneath the table, he sliced the ground and peered through at the 1st floor. Everything's ready to ship, we just need a word from the boss and we're gone. Ronin counted his future victims, organizing a plan of attack and looking for a good place to slip in through. Bathrooms, closets, places no one would notice a new person inside. Behind large objects was good too. Ronin backed out, then widened his hole so he could move through more easily, and went for his default position when the floor wasn't a good option, the ceiling. Most of these places had rafters on the bottom floor that he could climb on, but he tried to not visibly from there, like attacking so no one other than his victims could see where he came from. If someone he didn't knock out saw where he came from, they might alert the rest and make his job much more difficult. He moved like a spider, now well acquainted with moving along ceilings and defying gravity. There were rows of shelves on the 1st floor, diving the scene and separating them for him. He picked the leader instead of the easier target, that was the person who should have the detonator for the bombs littered around. He wrapped an arm and leg around the rafter to anchor himself in place while he drew his sword, slashing down and making a portal that'd lead him straight to his target. Ronin adjusted his grip, then breathed in. His hold on the rafters loosened as he leaned forward, falling gracefully through the portal and into another fight. The figure literally appeared from thin air, landing softly on the ground and cutting their leader down the middle with barely a whisper. Its sword carved 3 people in 2 with one blow as the thing spun like a top, each swing large but precise. He chopped them to bits, throwing in kicks and pommel strikes as they fell. A strange fog radiated off of him, flowing along the floor and creeping around their legs. The remaining men stepped back as Ronin looked over each of them, then jumped upward and disappeared. Quote. Where'd he? Ronin reappeared, cutting the man's legs off and hitting him with a spinning back kick into others, then jumped up again and disappeared. A few seconds later, he returned and struck one of the shelves, sending it crashing down onto the unlucky gangsters. Quote. Where is Mao? The voice seemed to come from within the fog itself, surrounding the last standing members. Where is he? It wasn't a question, not with the way that things said it. Another one of them disappeared entirely, then fell from the ceiling right onto the survivors. Some managed to get out of the way, but the rest got sliced up by a phantom blade. He appeared atop the chopped bodies, faceless and emotionless. Where is he? They all tried to charge him, not out of confidence but out of fear. If they didn't beat him now, they might all be slowly whittled to nothing. Unfortunately, they didn't notice that they entered a mass of fog that was up to their necks. Ronin's arm seemed to twitch as his sword disappeared into the thin fog, reappearing in them as it left white lines on their body that ran through their whole bodies. Quote. You don't seem to know. Ronin spoke as their bodies were chopped to bits without him even approaching them. At least he's not involved in this, I might put him down if he was. He looked up, eyeing the stairwell and thinking of the people that'd be hidden throughout the floors now. It was his job to mop them up since he started this. He just had to make sure every one of these schmucks would be asking about Mao when they woke up. He kicked another disembodied head, then sheathed his sword as he sorted through the room. He was getting pretty good at this, but he could always use a little more practice, and after he finished gathering up the bombs and detonator, he could cut loose against the rest of the schmucks upstairs. This wouldn't even take 10. Yamato carved the floor open, making some of the schmucks fall into his grasp as he cut them into pieces. The portals on the floor shut as quickly as they opened, leaving the entire floor a dangerous spot to stay. It was fun to watch them, it was like playing the floor as lava. He'd move outside the building like how he came in, but he couldn't be sure where the heroes were watching. Instead, he came straight up through a small hole, sheathing his sword and making himself as small a target as he could, with arms and legs tucked in. His legs kicked out after they went through the portal, his feet landing on either side of the hole. His legs bent at the ankle and knees as he tensed, leaning forward for a bit of forward momentum. Quote. Usually, I say style right about now. He exploded backward instead of forward, spinning his entire body to build up momentum and cleaving the man, the desk, and the wall behind him. Now, I'd say which form it was. He pushed off the wall, using a small set of slashes to teleport to the far side of the room and drive his sword into the next one. Then, he pulled upward, splitting the body and drawing up for the next attack. His leg came up and kicked his victim in the stomach, pinning him as the flat of his blade crashed into half of his head, and both sides went out like a light. Then I give the name of the style. He backed out through the portal, the same one he used to cross the room to his second victim. The crowd tried to swarm him while he played with his second victim, but by moving through the portal, he was now on the opposite side of the room and behind them. He turned off the portal and charged as they turned around, slicing sideways through all of them. Limbs and torsos flew as Yamato danced, his right arm carrying the weight of the sword while his left chose the angles, making for quick precise strikes. He took a step back and scanned the room. With the enemies now on the floor and screaming, the detonator in his grasp, and the heroes with their thumbs up their asses outside, all was well. He sheathed his sword but left it on as he knocked the remaining victims out, then released Yamato's smoke. Their bodies were patched together while he began to sift through the evidence, picking future targets and taking pictures. Just before he left, they were all tied together. It was time to exit. He went down the stairs as he replaced Yamato's batteries, checking on the hostages. He cut one of them free and pointed to the exit. Get out. Heroes are waiting. They'll help. He disappeared as the man took off his gag and bandana, looking around to only find smoke. He stood, looking at the others, then hurried outside. He would give the heroes plausible cause to enter, letting them take the things inside as evidence while Ronin made tracks. Yamato came out, slicing through the ground and letting him fall into the sewers. All in all, it was a great raid, but he'd probably be hearing from Mao tomorrow at this rate. He was making great time, at least. Maybe he should just ask Eiko to set up a meeting, but he didn't want anyone to pair the two of them together. He shook his head, muttering. At least that speech was easy. Did Yue have a class on giving good speeches? Maybe that would be his next demand, for whatever Nezu needed him to do after his little training camp. He just tried to keep it short and to the point. As god-awful as he was at inspiring courage and confidence in people, he seemed to be even better at inspiring fear and panic. He wasn't even trying at the end, with those portal attacks. He was just trying out moves to see how they went. Teleporting people through the floor seemed pretty good since it made his opponents take predictable stances, like on top of objects and walls. Quote. What's that noise? He had drawn Yamato to begin teleport running, but something else was in here with him. Irrelevant. He'd just outrun it. Gotcha bitch. Maruko laughed as she rounded the corner, leaping off the walls and floor with ease. I knew you'd come here, all I had to do was wait for you to come Toei. Stop running. Ronin took off, with his least favorite fan in tow, chasing him down. Looked like he was going to get to make up for the parkour practice he missed with his god-awful speech. Chapter and notes. Yoyagati yoyit my speed. I don't know what any of that means, but this took too long. The portal sword Yamato is always hard to write because it's hard to let you know what's actually happening without pulling the brakes on the action. For example, in the last building when he's fighting on the first floor, Ronin is teleporting between the ceiling and the floor. Problem is, the goons never figure out where he's teleporting her from. That's all my thoughts on what's happened in this, or at least all my thoughts about something specific. You have any questions, we've got a comment section. That way I can custom tailor my response to your question and prove definitively that I don't have a clue what's going on either. In the meantime, ranting. A fun thing for writing is having stakes. For most stories, it's pretty important since it gives failure meaning. If failure has no meaning or isn't possible, it isn't impressive when someone does something. For example, opening a can of soda is fairly easy and has low consequences, so it has low stakes. Winning a shootout with an enemy sniper is pretty difficult and has very high consequences, so it has high stakes. The problem is writing stakes and having them make sense in the story. For example, Ronin right now is taking on people who wouldn't be afraid to kill him at least. However, the stakes don't feel high even though on some level these people are stronger than him. They're more familiar with their quirks and physically stronger, but it doesn't feel like it's high stakes because of who Ronin is. The stakes have to make sense to the character, but you do want stakes. Ronin in this chapter could be at risk of dying from the goons, but with his tendencies to prepare and high skill with his weaponry, it doesn't make sense that he could lose, making the stakes pretty low. It just feels like he's showing off even though these people are dangerous. You can use this to build high tension though, by using a scene that seems like it's stacked one way to turn it on its head. I'm going to use my own writing as an example since I know what the idiotic author intended when vomiting through a keyboard. In the Kaminari Intern arc, the final battle didn't really have high stakes, at least not for Ronin. He didn't have anything to lose, the fight wasn't particularly difficult, and it was in a safe space. For Kaminari, however, it was a very tense fight. He wasn't just fighting to win, he was fighting to earn his teacher's respect and prove that he had learned. No one would have thought badly if he never won, though, since Ronin is more viewed as a superhuman than a real person. He was considered the first super vigilante after all and is one of the criminal's heroes are warned not to fight alone. Kaminari didn't need to win, he just needed to learn. But Kaminari wanted to win and created his own stakes. By the character having some motivation in the matter, you can add tension, especially if it's deeply rooted in the character. For Kaminari, this is about showing the first person who listened to, taught, and understood him that he did learn, that he did change, and that he can grow. By setting up an internal goal that realistically could and would lose, tension is created as he tried to fulfill this mini motivation. I'm running out of words in these notes, so adios. Next chapter might come faster than this one, but I'm starting to get more homework, so who knows. Chapter 80. Chapter Summary. Ronin attempts to get Mao's attention through a violent spree of takedowns but gets the wrong rival's attention. Whoops. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. You're pretty familiar with this place, rat. Maruko bounded down the sewers after him, their movements almost the exact same. Neither touched the floor as they moved, bounding off walls over and over and rounding corners at breakneck speeds. Ronin had to close all of his portals after he made them, otherwise, Maruko would get to use them to catch up with him. It was really getting aggravating. I don't have time for your antics today, Maruko. Beat it. You trying to boss me around? She smirked, then sped up slightly. Somebody got a schedule. Boo-hoo, cry me a river. You're just some villain, and today I'm gonna grind you into the dirt. I seriously don't have the time for this. He gave her one last warning, then looked around. He should be getting close, and he could turn this L into AW if he was right. Here's hoping he was. Yamato stopped carving the air and scratched the ceiling of the sewer tunnels, giving Ronin a new escape route right as Maruko could have caught him. He jumped off her, making sure to drive a foot into her shoulder as he went to knock her back. He rose inside the warehouse, surrounded by kidnappers and the kidnappees. Yamato was glowing, radiating smoke. His cloak floated for a moment as his momentum carried him upward. Everyone stared in confusion as he switched from the one-handed grip he used with the X slash to a two-handed grip. Sorry boys, I'll make this quick. Yamato created more and more smoke, giving him something he could slip through. The smoke went active as he fell through it, slipping into the cold world his quirk made. He didn't think about or ever bother using this other world, but he could see through the other world, seeing the portals that lead out of it. The cold world was blue and frosty, easily 0 degrees. He couldn't stay in it for too long. He ran through the cold world on a ground that just seemed to be blue smoke, picking a spot and hopping through it, then slicing into his new victim before ducking back into the cold world. Maruko turned as he jumped from thin air, seemingly using his portal to enter the building. How'd you? No more holding back Yamato. He appeared again, cutting down 2 more before falling back through the fog. It was pretty clear to see, Ronin was getting faster. While they couldn't see him literally throwing himself through portals in the cold world, they could see his momentum increasing every time he disappeared. He carved through them, always staying far away from Maruko. She chased after him, like a game of whack-a-mole with a single very hyper mole. He'd dive out of the smoke, then back in right as she sprung midair. The smoke kept spreading and giving him a wider range to work from until he skipped floors again. On the second floor, they were ready, but not ready for him. He rose from the floor with a spin, spreading smoke everywhere before sinking back through the floor and landing on Maruko, who had been trying to follow him, kicking off to go back to the second floor and diving through the smoke into the Cold War. He could hear them collide, the goons who jumped where he was and Maruko who had followed him up again instead of using the stairs. He came out of the cold world and moved upward, leaving Maruko to deal with these schmucks. He could hear her shouting at him, but what did he care about fighting rivals? She could sort out her issues by talking to a psychologist, not by kicking him in the face. Hey, get back, fuck off. He could hear her screaming as he rose up the stairs, kicking the door down to divert their attention. Anyone inside the room's eyes would be drawn to that open door while he ran past and carved open the wall, leaping inside and tackling the nearest gangster. That split second of confusion let him take the initiative and tear through everything in his way, slicing and slashing through everything until the entire room was ribbons, coated in white lines. Get back here, Ronin. Ronin did one last sweep of the room, taking only 2 pictures before bailing out the roof. This was another small hideout, nothing big or important in here. Not even a bomb in sight. Right as Maruko burst into the room, he created a portal and went through the ceiling. Instead of following him, she jumped straight through the ceiling, doing a little flips as she landed in front of her own hole. You're not getting me. Stop running, damn it. He didn't even stick around to see her do that little flip, though, he was already off and running as soon as he went through the roof. He knew roughly where his next target was, and it was way easier to find them above ground than below it. They took off in a duet of parkour, with one like a charging animal and one moving like an elegant dance. His steps were light, to avoid wasting energy and keep pushing forward as he moved through his portals. Maruko left a clear imprint with every jump, cracking the ground as she moved faster and faster. You waste energy on verticality. He leapt across buildings, creating portals midair to close the gaps his legs couldn't overcome on their own. Rabbits jump because their legs are designed to, you're just wasting energy. Shut the fuck up already. I'm here to kick your ass, not learn your opinion. Maruko was snarling, trying to hit him out of the air with tackles but always missing by the slightest margins. Did you know that when attacking, power comes from the ground? You pushing off the ground is what gives your hits impact. Otherwise, you might just push yourself backward instead of doing any damage. Kind of like what you're doing right now. He slowed down, letting her dive ahead and miss him entirely. He then sped back up while she had the fun of turning around and trying to figure out where he was. You spend too much time in the air. If you stayed on the ground, you'd hit much harder. What do I have to do to make you shut up? She leapt through the air again, and this time he went right under her. Stop running away like a spineless bitch and fight. Furthermore, you don't have any mobility in the air. He let her dive at him, then turned and ran an entirely new direction while she soared helplessly towards where he had been going. You can't adjust in time, so you waste time and energy overshooting. You really do need to learn restraint, at least. I won't kill you. I'll just make it very, very painful. She jumped off a building and squarely at him, while he stopped dead and turned to face her. I didn't mean restraint for my sake. He only swung the sword twice, but she went straight through the new portal. The world went entirely blue for a moment before it returned to its usual shade as she was surrounded by strange people, inside of a building, all standing around a screen and looking at her. Quote. It's Maruko. Kill her. All of the men tried to jump her, but she tore through them easily, bounding off the walls, ceiling, and floor to crush them. It seemed Ronin had sent her into his next target. She was fuming as she slammed one of these jackasses into the floor so hard it cracked. Ronin, I'm going to fucking kill you. Ronin kept on moving after sending Maruko in. He might have shouted more about Mao, but he kind of wanted to get away before that. Since he'd been moving in a straight line for so long, he was going to start running out of big buildings soon. Maybe he should get a ride or something, like a motorcycle or car. It only took the briefest memories of trying to drive the police car to throw that idea out the window. He kept moving over the buildings, with a few shouts from below reaching him. A few people outside of the hero seemed to recognize him, making him feel pretty good. He checked his layout for a second, overlooking the final target. It wasn't big or dramatic. He saved some easy ones for the end when he figured he'd be tired. Only 20 or so people inside, easy pickings for him. Plus he could go slowly now that Maruko was tied up in legalities. She had to finish up with the current villains and the paperwork before she could chase him unless she had some way to weasel her way out of that. He breathed out, stepping away from the ledge and gauging the distance between him and the target building, then going into a dead sprint before pushing off the ledge. He flew over 10 feet easy, over half the distance between the buildings, then flicked his arm out and created a portal right before gravity gave him a close look at the alleyway below. He stepped out onto the roof of the building, listening to the quiet for a moment. He tried to pin where the heroes were in case he made an above-ground escape again, then cut the roof and listened. And heard nothing. It was oddly quiet going in. Put him on edge, whatever it meant. He slipped an eye in, suspecting an ambush but only found an abandoned room. Nobody was inside, from gangsters to hostages. He fell through the roofing and looked around the room, listening. In the distance, he could hear something below him. Fighting. Were the heroes already here? Wasn't his problem if they were, but he had to make sure at least. It wasn't like Maruko, at least. There were still the screams and heavy impacts, but they came together much faster. Not as much movement overall, but whoever it was, they were crushing the competition. Was this person one of the gangsters? Another rogue hero? A vigilante? The third and second floors had also been abandoned, probably to try and fight whatever was on the first floor. Heavy breathing, and a deep laugh. He'd recognize that tone anywhere. He stopped at the stairwell to watch the man perform his craft. They didn't come one by one but swarmed him. He pulled his jacket off, whipping it over his head like a flail while laughed before throwing it at the rushing crowd, stepping back and going sideways. His left leg came up, his right bearing the weight as his left became a blur of kicks. Every hit was aimed to crush the opponent, hitting exactly where the giant wanted. Mao laughed as his leg slowed down, spinning his entire body as to kick with his right instead of his left. His right heel clocked one of the gangsters in the arm, snapping it like a Kit Kat while Mao just laughed harder. Come on, show me what ya losers got. While Ronin had to go quietly and stealthily, Mao was better the more people were there. The bigger the numbers, the bigger the thrill was. He grabbed one of the storage containers the kidnapped victims were in and ripping a door off like it was paper, then slammed it down like a wrestler would slam a chair down onto the head of a man even larger than him. The man on the receiving end had been trying to charge him but lost all momentum and staggered into Mao's uppercut, which sent him cleanly out of the entire building. There was a new hole in the building as Mao laughed, egging them on. More, show me what ya weaklings can do. Mao laughed as he moved through the crowd, using his body as a battering ram to crush the enemy. While Maruko tanked hits, Mao used his legs to slam his body into anyone stupid enough to try and hit him. He swerved around the room, blocking attacks with his arms, grappling anything he could and literally throwing them around like ragdolls. Come on. Mao took a step back, slamming a foot down his laughed, clawing the air his voice echoed out. Now the heroes were trying to get in, taking one look at Mao, and stepping down to try calling in backup. Hey, fucking spineless bitches. Damn straight. Ronin carved open the floor, squatting slightly as he watched the show. And here I thought I'd be wrecking shit for a week before you showed up. Ain't nice to keep a bitch waiting, and you're the most loyal fucker I know. Mao laughed, punting one of the gangsters out and taking out two heroes. Wanna go, right here, right now. Nope, I need your help, follow me and, Ronin widened the portal for Mao, then gave him one last look before he slipped in. Try to keep up, K. OHOH, somebody's cocky tilde, Mao laughed, taking heroes' attacks to the back like they weren't shit. He turned slowly, feeling the hype build up enough to use his third quirk. It usually worked automatically, but he never got enough energy to use it most of the time. Right now though. The red energy coursed up from his heart and into his hands, making them glow red before he slammed them down. The red shockwave made the building shake and sent everything in front of him flying back. He laughed as he stepped through the portal, dropping into the sewers. The two ran through the sewers. Ronin used the light of Yamato, and Mao saw the entire world in shades of red now. While neither had great vision, their instincts could make up where their eyes were lacking. Eventually, they came out of an alleyway and got to see light. Ronin got to marvel at the new Mao, although it wasn't too different. Mao had put on weight, and not in the fat sense. He seemed even bigger than last time, still showing off his muscles without a shirt, just his leather jacket which he had been throwing around like a fighting character throws Hadokens. He now had a helmet on though, and it was very familiar to Ronin. It was the first full helmet Ronin had worn, after all. The helmet hid his identity. A little. He'd take what he could get. So, y'all wanna fight now? Mao focused on the goal, differently from Maruko. Maruko had gotten distracted by a grudge match, while Mao had noticed Ronin and finished what he was doing before pursuing him. It helped Mao's case though that Ronin seemed to be seeking him out, while Ronin was trying to ditch Maruko. The difference in mentality though split them and made sure that while Maruko would be a problem, Mao would be dangerous. That attention to detail was a bigger threat than any of Maruko's instincts. Now that Mao finished clobbering goons and evading capture, he was on to his next goal, Ronin. Ronin wasn't of the mind to play around and got to the point. You know about guns. I have some of a gun I want to build, and you're the best person I can trust with it. You, trust me, Biwahaha. Mao managed to get 3 whole words out before laughing. To be honest, that was 3 whole more words than Ronin thought he was gonna say. Me, A-N-D. Yeah, ha. I need help getting some parts for an AEC, so I won't be able to get the parts legally. The chillers were about gun smuggling, so you should know where I can get the parts. I'm willing to pay. He walked out of the alley, confident no heroes would be here as he walked inside an old office. There were still bloodstains from his first gang raid. Good times. Chairs were already set up, and the parts of the AEC had been moved here this morning. It had been an annoying run, but at least now he was only taking the important parts. Are you interested? Quote. Y'all wanna buy some gun parts? I'm game, but I got a question. Mao took a seat, spinning it back so he could sit and rest his arms on the back of the chair. Was an AEC. Ronin nodded to the mess in the corner. Big gun. I got most of the essential parts. I think the guy the first swiped it from was trying to make a new gun out of it. Mao didn't even get to rest a minute in the folding chairs Ronin had dug up, sifting through the parts as his brow furrowed. It seemed, like Kaminari, Mao had a few subjects he was unrivaled in. While Kaminari's was really weird, Mao made a career out of his, fighting and guns. I think I need to know what an AEC is. Seriously, this thing's the firing chamber, right? What's it firing? He fingered the firing chamber, which was big enough to shoot steak knives. Do you want the full story or the quick one? Quick. Mao sifted through the parts, muttering. I know a couple of guys who might know where ya can get it, but it's pretty pricey. What price range we working with? Broke as shit. I've got 800,000 yen saved for this. Mao whistled tried to whistle. He couldn't and was just blowing air, but the effort was there. That sum of cash was around 8,000 in American dollars, pretty expensive for a gun on its own. He'd been saving his money and taking a little more from his victims as ranger recently for this, and it wasn't like they were usually short on cash. Just taking 1,000 yen ahead, only took 100 guys to get to own ETH of what he got, and he was fighting about 20 a building, 3 buildings a day at least. Damn, and a quick story. What's AEC stand for? Mao was starting to get an idea of either how many parts they'd need, or how important these parts would be. This would be pretty pricey if Ronin expected to spend 800,000 yen on this. Anti-elephant cannon, now, when can we start getting the parts? Is today good? Wait. Andy, what? You want that full story now? Will it make your elephant thing make sense? A little. Fuck, shoulda known you'd be talking a lot. That's why you brought the chairs. Mao sighed, rubbing his head and sitting down, draping his arms over the back of the chair. Ronin tossed him a drink. Mao checked to make sure it wasn't something disgusting and popped it open while Ronin gave him a little history lesson. Chapter end notes. Yo Yagati eating children out the window yo. This chapter was secretly sponsored by orange cream soda and boxing, the only reason I survived writing it mentally and the thing that tired me out enough physically to force me to stay in one place for long enough to write it. Yeah, Maruko is still searching for Ronin while he and Mao are having a little story time. While one rival gets more violent, the other rival stays violent but waits for the right time. After all, right now, there's money to be made and he gets to know his daughter's best friend. Mao demonstrated one of the extra quirks that he was given, and while I won't say what they are, they both can be automatic quirks that work without a thought. Problem is, he rarely gets hyped enough to use all 3 quirks. He's usually using only 2/3, but we'll get more into that when Mao puts business to the side and challenges Ronin again. What's the AEC? Am I just gonna time skip over the explanation so the readers still don't know after dropping the name to lower hype and increase confusion? Probably, sounds like something I would do. I am a dumbass first and a writer second. Well, that's it, I'm a pass out now. Chapter 81. Chapter summary. The boys go on a shopping spree, so girly I know. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Mao couldn't help smiling as he spun the bullet between his fingers, so long it could have been mistaken for. Well, he wasn't sure, but it didn't look like a bullet. It was just too big at almost a foot long, a twisted hunk of metal that had its own grooves to help it spin when in the air. He bought this one for his collection, and a second one in case Ronin let him fire the AEC once. He kinda wanted to see what it could do. Ronin finished forking over the cash and checked the list. They had gone to each of the stores Mao could think of, picking up parts for the anti-elephant cannon, and should be almost done. Ronin, how much left? 7 parts, but we needed 50 when we started. Ronin picked up 2 of the larger boxes, nodding over to Mao to pick up the rest. They weren't that heavy on their own, they were just awkward because of how many boxes there were. Some of them went into bags, some stacked, but either way they all had to get moved somehow. They left, with sacks and boxes in tow, to drop off all the new parts. They had been going from stores to the office over and over. Mao wasn't great with math, but this thing would be pretty heavy when fully assembled. They both moved very quickly. Even when Mao had almost no hype, he could carry a lot of weight. He'd been working out to try and solve that problem that he was a slow starter, and it paid off right now. This could even be considered another workout, especially when chasing behind his rival. Despite all his muscles and strength, Ronin moved much faster with the same amount of junk tied to him. It was fun to have a goal again. He didn't have goals for so long, and now that he did he could barely wait to crush this one. The parts were placed around the office, and they went on to Mao's next shop. Mao got more and more excited as they moved through the sewers, and Ronin could use that fancy magic sword of his to fly. The trips to the shops were always the faster part of buying all these things, and way easier than when he was selling them crap. He was pretty sure he was the one who brought in some of the parts Ronin was buying, which is why the sellers couldn't hide that they had it. Mao kept track of all his dealings for the big man on top, who was always telling him to pay attention to finances. They arrived at the docks, Mao leading them down the yard as he eyed each ship by name, trying to remember without pulling out his phone what the next shop was named. They had 3 more to go if this one didn't pan out, but the AEC was a foreign gun and this place dealt in a lot of imports. It'd make sense that they might have a few parts from Africa. Mao's eyes flickered between 2 ships until he recognized one of the people, pulling Ronin along with him. Ronin had switched to some weird cowboy outfit, with a stupid as fuck looking hat and a ton of guns. Looked stupid and funny as hell. He made sure to let Ronin know his opinions on his lame outfit, and what he should be wearing. And was with that big coat. In this weather, ya dumbass trying to burn to death. Gotta put my gun somewhere. We can't all just headbutt through walls, you know. This the boat. Ronin was playing with the shotgun that was hiding along his right leg, usually covered up by his coat. On the opposite leg was that magic sword of his, also hidden by that weird giant coat. Looked kind of familiar for some reason, but Mao couldn't figure out why for the life of him. Oh well, couldn't be important. Yeah, just follow me. Mao stepped up and through people, walking like he owned the place and shoving aside anyone stupid enough to get in his way. His big grin and confident standing were enough to show his standing in the dockyard, literally head and shoulders bigger than the other people. They moved up the docks, Mao greeted some people, and they went below decks in under a minute and on to business. Mao wasn't one for dawdling around and kept things going smoothly while Ronin got down to brass tacks. They picked out the parts, Mao threatened to throw someone into a wall a couple of times, then they recognized the shotgun Ronin started playing with and they lowered the prices a little more. After the threats and bargaining, the dynamic duo of dipshits dipped out. Ronin put all the parts together, looking out over all the junk like a giant puzzle. Each part had a place, and it was his new job to find that place and make sure everything came together well. Oh, and Mao was still here for some reason. Ah, he forgot to haggle with him. You want payment, right? 10% of what I paid for the parts, for getting me the shops and saving me money. Sound good. Quote. EH, 5%, and I get to fire the gun when you're done. Mao held up one of the bullets he bought. Ronin figured he might try this since Mao didn't have any other reason for the bullets. You can fire it once, and not at any buildings, including indoors. Didn't want any major property damage coming down on his head. Mao's smile got even bigger though, and he grabbed Ronin's hand with a crushing grip, laughing as he shook the smaller man up and down. Perfect. My number so ya don't have to go blowing so much shit next time y'all wanna talk to the main man. He let go and exchanged info with him. Next time y'all go on a rampage, give OL backquote Maui call. It'll be a blast. Don't you have a job to do? Mao just laughed it off, waving goodbye. Maybe. See ya soon. Sheet, this gonna be a blast. Ronin shook his head in disbelief as Mao jumped out the window, laughing as he crashed and climbed straight over the next building before jumping again. It was like watching a little All Might, if All Might was a gangster and actually American, and had a couple of concussions. Ronin refocused and started opening packages, setting himself for a very long work ahead. This would probably take a long time, and with a little luck, he'd get it done before the test. He should be getting a quick update of the rules, but if it was anything like the last test he did, it should be difficult but not impossible, focusing on their weakness to force development. Seemed a little stupid, how could someone conquer the weakness in just 30 minutes? That took days of practice at best, usually weeks. Some people never got over their weaknesses and just made it worse, and yes, he was bashing Maruko and her stupid movement style again. He began to piece together the AEC very slowly. This would be a long night, and he'd be late. Maybe he could get something to eat on the way home, cause he didn't think he'd be getting home in time for dinner. Nezu went over everything one last time with the heroes who came in to help, and the teachers who'd be stepping up their game to challenge the students. The heroes had to be specifically picked to force each student to grow, whether they were from in-house or external. One of those external challenges was the first person to arrive and had been resting since he arrived. His cowboy hat pushed over his eyes as he leaned back, catching a bit of sleep before his fight against Najire. He had listened to the rules when he arrived and been sleeping in the corner ever since, next to a very strange and suspicious object. Most of the heroes were too interested in themselves and joking around to notice the extremely shady figure trying to sleep on the transport, taking up the front seat behind the bus driver. The ones who did, unsurprisingly, were the teachers who knew him, even if they didn't know they knew him. Quote. Is he going for the same style as you? Midnight squinted at Ranger, then looked back at Snipe and tried lining them up side by side. Why's he asleep? We're supposed to be testing in under an hour. At least he showed up if he was that tired, although I'm not sure how well he'll do, 13 said as she ran another check on her suit. Who's he for? A third year or second year? Not sure, but if Nezu picked him. Snipe left that sentence unfinished because they all knew the kind of people Nezu tried to pick. He wanted to put Mirio against the Nomu from the USJ to see how well the next generation of heroes would do but instead had to settle for just letting Mirio fight All Might. Focus on your own fights. From underneath the hat, an extremely tired voice whispered. If you have the time to waste on me, use it on yourselves. Quote. Aizawa, why are you dressed as a cowboy? Midnight shook her head in confusion, but Snipe offered a good perspective. Well, a relatively good perspective. People see him in his usual outfit all the time, so now it'll be harder to recognize him at a glance. Snipe adjusted his own outfit, making sure the gas mask was snugly attached. A weird outfit to do it though. Just like yours. Aizawa slurped juice, sitting across the aisle from the stranger. What are you guys doing? If you have the time to be standing around gossiping, you have the time to focus on your jobs. Quote. Are there two Aizawas? Midnight was tempted to move that dumb-looking cowboy hat, but Nezu had just come out to give them their final words. All the heroes gathered together to listen to him go over everything before going each to their own arena. The tired cowboy dragged himself out of the bus and into one of the large cityscapes, the terrain his challenger would be most used to. He had asked that Najire get as many advantages as reasonable, so he could hold back as little as possible. He had stuck wheels to the bottom of the AEC so he could drag it around as he surveyed the scene in person. He already had gotten the layout, but it was different than seeing it in person. You couldn't get a feel for the magnitude until you saw just how small you were compared to everything else. Hey Ranger. Ranger himself didn't even spare that furry fucker a glance, planning out how the battle could go. He could see it now, blurrily, but the more he learned about her and her style the clearer it would get. In order to get everything under control, he'd need to fire the first shot. So, Ranger, did you have any custom rules for your match? You already said getting to the end doesn't count as a win. He set the AEC down, stretching. This train wreck started in 10 minutes, so he had 10 minutes to set up. Didn't want to waste it talking to Nezu. Yup, might I ask, her mobility's good enough. It's still terrible, but it's not a major problem. It's only bad against other flying opponents, and I don't have the skill to force her to improve. I want her when conditions to beat me in combat, whether she arrests me or incapacitates me. He finished his stretches, trying to protect his back as much as possible before the mess got started and started to hustle, taking refuge under an overpass. Najire seems bad at information gathering, one-on-one combat, ranged combat, melee combat, and close quarters combat. I'll take care of information gathering by missing on the first shot, leaving us just focusing on her combat skills, or lack of any combat skills. I wouldn't go that far, but I would. I want this to force her to fight. She's got the mobility, she just doesn't pair it well with her fighting style. A better matchup would have been Hawks, a fellow flying and ranged hero. Instead, I'll just challenge her ranged skills and force her to fucking aim and stop wrecking everything. Quote. I'm gonna stop beating around the bush. What is that? Nezu nodded to the AEC, which Ranger set on its side like a barricade and adjusted his stance so he could rest his arms atop it and line up his shots. You know how people say it's time to bring out the big guns? Ranger looked down Cupid in kindness's sights, then adjusted. This is that gun. Quote. That was pretty stupid, yeah. It seems the vigilante who shoots first talks second is bad at talking. Does UA have courses over talking to people, like calming them down in a volatile situation or something? We do. You could attend it if you became a teacher here. Nope, just wanted to make sure the next generation of heroes are learning that much at least. Alright, I'll be going now. A siren will mark when the matches start. Ranger nodded, checking all his guns one last time, then smirking at the retreating figure. This was gonna be a fun test run. Chapter and notes. The AEC explanation is coming, I swear. Yo-yo yagati yagati Yu-Gi-Oh, what's poppin' Jimbo? Short chapter because we didn't have a lot of fighting, and I wanted to keep a general vibe for this chapter. Next chapter should have some of that action I've been putting off, and that explanation of the AEC. I must stop writing these notes and start work on the next chapter. Chapter 82, Nejire vs. Ranger. Chapter summary. UA's Heroics course pairs students against heroes in a one-on-one fight for their third-year final. This fight is Nejire vs. Ranger. Chapter notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Nejire read over the dossier again, highlighting anything that seemed important, but that seemed almost everything. Her opponent wasn't a faux villain or some robots, it was a real villain. Ranger. Her victory requirements were both easier and harder than the usual ones. She was allowed to damage more property than usual, but she had to beat Ranger in combat, either arresting him or incapacitating him. That wasn't her specialty, especially when Ronin had shown he could dodge her attacks in a one-on-one fight. They both fought with ranged combat, but nobody who'd seen both would wonder which was the better. It seemed she'd be pressed to practice her combat skills. She looked at the timer, sighing. It was almost time. She adjusted her gloves, giving herself a once-over. Handcuffs were ready just in case, medical supplies on hand, and her earpiece to talk to the supervisors was working. As the siren went off, signaling them to start, there was no reason to put it off anymore. She'd have to sink or swim. Nejire-chan remembered their last fight, and what getting hit with the bullets did. How her quirk had been cancelled out for a moment when hit with a blast, sending her into freefall. It seemed the safer option might be to approach on the ground or at least, not to fly too high. She pushed off the ground, staying only 5 feet off the ground to start with. She wasn't worried about finding Ranger, her dossier included his location down to the street. She had plenty of fights in this city and knew her way around it by now. As she walked onto the street, Ranger holed himself into, the first exchange kicked off. 2 shots whistled in front of her, forcing her to take cover. While she was an obvious target on the ground, covered in different shades of blue, Ranger wore browns and grays, making it harder to see him at a glance even without the gunfire forcing you to run. Even after the first shots had been fired, she couldn't see exactly where he was. Nejire shifted routes, going over one road so that Ranger couldn't shoot her without moving and approaching that way until she was 1 street over and 1 street under his position. Ranger was positioned at AT section that lead into a bridge support and put himself against that support to prevent attacks from behind. That support beam was too sturdy for either of them to break, making it effectively divide the city in half. The part they could attack each other from, and the part they couldn't. Nejire prepared to round the corner, charging both hands for as powerful an attack as possible. Ronin could dodge them before, but she was going to try and get the jump on him. Plus, this attack wasn't meant to hit him, just dislodge him from his current hold. But as she stepped around the corner to attack, she moved out of cover and into the line of fire for Ranger's twin pistols. Ba-bang. The twins fired off almost simultaneously, blowing her backward. Not bad, but stealth. With your colors. Not good either. He kept on shooting her with ease, his shots hammering her backward and giving her the momentum to escape by flying backward and away. It looked like she could use her quirk as long as she didn't use them in the air blasts. The problem was his attacks were much faster than hers, leading into each other and giving him a continuous attack. He didn't seem to need to charge his attacks as she did. Nejire had to do some odd combination of fly running that she hadn't had to in a long time, probably since her first year. The shots pushed her further away, proving, to her at least, the first part of this fight would be to dislodge her opponent. He didn't have to chase her, which she had to imagine was pretty good for a marksman. In a chase, she could fly away while he just shot after her. If he didn't take her out, she could always try flying away to escape. The first encounter didn't seem to go well, but it gave her a lot of ideas of what was to come. Ranger didn't chase her any further, retreating once she left the effective range of the pistols. He would be sitting pretty at the overpass, waiting for her. She needed something that could throw him off, and usually, her wide attacks would do that easily. The problem was, if she could shoot him, he could shoot her. She took another angle, relying on the dossier and the line that mentioned that she wouldn't need to worry about collateral. That was an order that came in for areas that were already destroyed, or when villains were threatening citywide destruction. Realistically, this permission wouldn't be given to deal with someone like Ranger, but it was given for a reason. Ranger didn't have the destructive potential to destroy a city, so it was given to her to help her grow. It seemed to encourage the use of wider, bigger blasts. She moved down a few streets, charging a blast, then peered around the corner and shot it down the road without stepping out of cover. The attack quickly spread to envelope the entire street, but while there was no return fire, there was no sign of Ranger at all. She looked around again, then ducked back as another blast came out from behind the bridge support beam. You have the accuracy of a toddler using their quirk for the first time. You know what aiming is, don't you? His voice actually carried pretty well, despite the distance between them. I can aim. She fired a small blast at the source of his voice and missed him entirely, without him even needing to move. He didn't even give that one a return shot. She fired again, this time forcing him to move behind cover. What's with that big hold up? Are you wanting to see how fast I can shoot? He replied to her terrible small shots with some of his own, firing 6 in the time it'd take her to get one off. I'll at least admit I was wrong, it's more like the handling of a car crash. How long have you had this quirk for again? 14 years. I was a late bloomer, they say. She fired another charged shot, now charging all her shots from cover before reaching out to attack. He was getting more accurate with his attacks on her position, so she needed to move unless she wanted to step out and get domed instantly. She took a few steps back, then ran forward, flying across the road and behind new cover on the other side of the street. She'd been thinking about it before, but she was now sure of it. The shootout, the rolling dodges, the banter between them. This was definitely like a cowboy movie. She always wondered what it'd be like to be in a movie. Some heroes did it and they made it seem fun. She didn't think her finals would be her first real taste of it. You handle your quirk like a sledgehammer. What happened to precision? Is power all you have? He fired on her new position, with both of them now on the same side of the road and just over 100 feet between them. The gun blasts only hit like a quick punch at this range, showing their limits. However, they were fast and followed each other nicely. One good hit could throw her out of cover, and then he could move toward her while keeping up the barrage. I need a lot of power to knock down the big guys. Sorry, I'm just used to it. It was a little weird to get advice from your opponent, but you had said if you were good enough at listening your opponents would give you free tips. She probably didn't mean like this, but it made sense to listen to him. The big blasts might do more damage, but they didn't hit anything but other than the stuff she was supposed to be protecting. Didn't they teach you the square cube law and concentration? This is ridiculous. That line didn't make any sense, and she wasn't sure what he was talking about, but thinking about it for too long would give him an advantage, so she skipped over it. He had some weird trick where he would charge his shots as she did, but instead of being bigger, it was just stronger. She could tell since when the normal shots missed, she just felt a light breeze, but the charged shots could throw her around if she was too close. Her hair got thrown back every time he used one. His shots were all focused, and fired quickly. The reason she was allowed to break things up wasn't so she would use her big attacks, but so she could attack without worrying about the environment. Right now, Ranger was doing less harm to the surroundings than her with his small and quick shots, but since their quirks were so similar, couldn't she do those kinds of shots too? Instead of developing a new big attack that required a long charge up, she worked backward. Instead of charging another huge shot, she hid behind the corner, experimenting with small blasts and shooting them into the air. She had created blasts like this before, but she never used them in a fight. They were just for showing off or to practice generating the energy to shoot things. She had to concentrate pretty hard at first since it kept wanting to spread out, but this whole cowboy thing gave her a great idea. She took a look down the road, then ducked back as a charged shot sent her hair flying. She had a great idea. Ranger checked his guns, making sure that all his preparations for this shit show were in place. He was glad to be running out of reasons to put up with Nezu. The AEC was now finished, and he knew places he might be able to get more parts if necessary. The quick draw sheath that he never used was working and sitting nicely on his left hip. The only things left were to learn how to use this stupid helmet and maybe getting a better bodysuit, but his fingers weren't crossed on that bodysuit. He had changed all the batteries before coming here and even brought spares. He was wearing the Ronin body armor as protection just in case and was ready for the kickback when he finally got around to using the AEC. Well, if he didn't cap Najire-chan in the head before Thien in a different note, who picked their real name for their hero name? Well, it seemed weird, but who was he to judge? He didn't even get to pick his own names. He fired 2 more shots at the corner she was hiding behind. He just needed to keep up the pressure and stall her out to win. Right now, he won if they didn't fight and would crush her if they did. If things didn't change, it was an easy win for him. If she stopped wasting her quirk, though, she might have a chance. A speck of blue leaned out, and there was a small dot of yellow coming at him. He counter-fired, then ducked as the attack weakly scooted past him. It was smaller like he intended, but it wasn't focused. The energy overall was just less. With a smaller size, you could put the same amount of energy into it and get better results. That was the idea behind bullets, the power of a tiny explosion focused into a small chunk of metal to do more damage than the explosion could on its own. Quote. What, you trying to poke me to death? He fired his own shot in response, then a dozen more to drive the point home. With 2 guns versus 2 hands, they were theoretically on an even playing field. The big difference between them was experience, and unbeknownst to everyone except Nezu and Ranger himself, she edged him out in that category. In theory. Problem was, before the warehouse incident, he had never heard of her. She seemed to be some no-name US student, but then he didn't know how she got an internship with one of the Big 10. It made no sense that a combat hero would be as bad as she appeared to be in combat. He had even gotten a few of her fights to look at while waiting for the ride here before he had started napping on the bus. Her technique focused on power over precision, just like another student he had been asked to teach. But unlike Kaminari, who figured this out through introspection and trust, Najire-chan was just going to have to find this out in a fight, which made no sense. If you were still learning things in the middle of a fight, you were learning them a little too late. That was what prep work was for. Another weak shot or 2, and another couple of rounds in reply. He still had over 20 minutes to go, and enough batteries to weather this. Calling it a storm felt too generous. To weather this mild breeze. The AEC would be pointless here. I thought you were supposed to be a combat hero. Knew this was a waste of my time. He stood fully upright, leaving cover in what might have been suicidal against a good opponent, and walking straight into the middle of the street, holstering both guns. If you're just gonna waste my time, let's get this over with. He stood dead onto her, letting the wind blow past him and pushing his coat back. It felt nice. He didn't get this usually when he fought. Maybe he should ditch the gun aspect, it went too much against the rest of his style. But that did really make it seem like an entirely different person. Quote. Not sure what I should call this one. Mandem, Crossfire, High Noon, so many references to choose from. His right hand threw back his coat, showing off the shotgun nestled on his right thigh. Whatever it is, it's gonna be the 4th form of duty's call. Come on, Mercy. Is this supposed to be a cowboy shootout? She sounded so excited, which was ridiculous. She wasn't firing and was giving him a clear lead on where she was before he even drew, practically handing him the victory. That implies you'll be shooting back. This was probably going to be the end of it. He didn't have the time to waste on someone who couldn't figure out how to aim. He sat back, waiting for the signal he knew was coming. She couldn't stand to not make the most of this moment, so she'd shoot, and when she did. That sounds like a challenge. A more cautious opponent would realize the trap, but maybe she did and was just that confident in her skills. She went back to her wide energy blast with both hands, full charge, output level 40. Quote. Seriously, he had to wait for her to shoot for this technique to work, so might as well do it too, as stupid as speaking out loud was. Duty's call style. Spiraling surge. The energy shot out of her hands, forming a massive wave that could easily crush an opponent if it hit. 4th form. His hand grabbed Mercy, his shotgun, sliding it out of the holster and pointing it at the oncoming wave with a calm unbefitting someone this close to being blasted down the street. Najire wave. Crossfire. One was overflowing with excitement, and the other sounded bored as hell. The AEC. What was the AEC gonna do? Accelerate the ass kicking from under 5 minutes to under 5 seconds. He only came here to get the parts, but if he just put in more effort and coordinated with Mao he could have got them all without wasting an hour here. Opposed to his bored attitude, Ranger and Najire's different energies slammed into each other. At first glance, it was a contest of power, but that was only from the eyes of someone who didn't know the quirk air cannon's full effects. Energy hit wind, and the wind devoured the energy like a starving man, adding what had been Najire's power to its own and crushing the attack. It didn't absorb all of the attack to Ranger's surprise, but it absorbed more than enough to overpower what was left and crash into Najire, sending her spinning and flying backward, unable to activate her quirk as she was slammed through a building about 100 feet away. Quote. So it does have a limit. Interesting. Wonder if it depends on the size of the blast, or is a hard limit across all of them. If it's a hard limit, looks like the pistol's quick shot function does have a use after all. He rambled more for his own benefit, looking over the hole he punched in the corner Najire had been hiding behind. Her own attack had given his the power it needed and then some. I wonder if a charged shot can absorb more or less energy. Looks like this wasn't such a waste of time after all. Oh yeah, and I'm supposed to be teaching right now. He remembered the real reason he was in this mess, not to practice with guns but to teach some girl in 30 minutes what she hadn't got out of school in under 3 years. He sauntered over to the hole, gun at the ready if she tried anything funny. If you are still conscious, make a noise. Ow. Fantastic. If you need medical attention, say so and the fight's off. Nope. Kablam. Then I will try to fix that. He spun Mercy by the lever, readying for another shot. You still don't have enough focus. Your smaller attacks were like getting hit by a super soaker. Your quirk doesn't seem to need to be bigger to do more damage, so stop spreading it out. Kablam. Just a friendly reminder, say when you can't keep going and I'll stop. Back on track though, you can't concentrate, and your attacks in a one-on-one fight are easy to dodge. You won't always have backup. Create settings where the opponent can't dodge, instead of relying on others to set them up for you or your opponents getting concussions and not knowing how their legs work. Kablam. I'm running out of general tips, and I don't want to tell you how to win. Are you still conscious or what? He didn't want to enter what seemed to be an office, because if she was still fine, she could easily ambush him. He could see a large secretary's desk that she might have hidden behind and now waited for her response before engaging further. These blasts weren't powerful enough to cause serious injury without help though, so even if he had hit her she should still be conscious enough to give him a response. Crash, still conscious. From the floor above him, the blast came straight down, shattering glass as it moved. It came down like rain, spreading to cover a huge area and turning the tables rather nicely on him. He could either point up, shooting himself in the face and taking care of the huge blast she shot out from the second-story window, or dodge. Ranger chose to not break his own neck and dove into the building right as she made the cheesy line about still being conscious. At least she responded well enough. Enough introspection. She's earned it at least. Ronin, Ranger, whoever the fuck he was, cleared his mind as he dove into the building, the road behind him shattering under the weight. The force seemed a little much, but so was what he did, so they were even. He heard her behind him and dove behind that desk he thought she was using, hearing the crackle of energy and seeing the room light up as she did the same trick he'd just done to her. The energy washed over the room, knocking everything back and moving the desk along the floor, with Ranger strapped in for the ride. Not a bad setting, huh? Not a great one either. He leaned over as she recharged and fired a return volley, but she flew up and out of the way. Now that he was facing her head on, he'd focus on the fight and stop being bored, at least so long as she kept this level of competency. She dropped down again, firing 2 attacks at full power, and he replied with 1 uncharged shot. This time the attacks cancelled out, meaning she was putting in more energy and learned from their first exchange. She used the wall of energy she created as a smokescreen, firing lighter attacks at him. Ranger weathered the first shot, unintentionally, and found out that it had all the stopping power of a charging 7-year-old. He tanked the second willingly, firing his own normal shot and forcing her to retreat up again. Your winning tactic was going back to poking me to death. His condescending tone made it clear just how weak the attack really had been. She dropped back into sights, and they exchanged another set of rounds. She led again with a heavy attack and stuck around to fire some lighter ones after the fact, her attack slightly winning out against his but losing so much power it didn't do anything. He tanked another light attack, stepping back at the impact. It was more like a push than a hit, if even. He powered through her weaker attacks and forced her back with another shotgun blast. Once again, she dipped out by going above him. Although repetitive, she was doing a good job at keeping him boxed in. Unfortunately, villains won ties. If she wanted to win, something had to change. She was at least doing all right. She got him to move pretty far from where he had started, leaving some of his equipment around and being stuck in a building. He went into this wondering if the fight would last 2 minutes because she took an aerial approach and got shot out of the sky, then broke something while landing. It takes time to improve, you know. And you've got less than 20 minutes, so start improving. Another exchange, but this time he moved to the side before she shot. Her blast went straight into the room, but his hit her sideways and cut through it. It forced her back, and instead of going straight up, she dove to one side first, probably due to the quirk absorbing effect of the blasts. It was a very strange shootout. Her next blast came without her entirely landing, just floating down far enough to attack then quickly rising. She seemed to be trying to turn this into an endurance match, which was unfortunate. He was spending way less energy than her, and most of his destructive power came from her attacks. He really was a bad matchup for her. I'm getting bored of this, Najire. Was this all the tricks you had? Instead of just shooting at each other, he drew a Bowie knife, one of the first trophies he ever claimed from a victim, and threw it at her as she entered his field of view. It moved cleanly past her attack, hitting her in the shoulder before her attack could properly spread out, and bounced off. Bowie knives, it turned out, weren't meant for throwing. But it was good enough. The hit shoulder moved, making one of the blasts miss by a mile, teetering off course and weakening the overall force. Meanwhile, he fired, then fired, then fired again. He now used a series of blasts as he advanced, intending to leave by blasting her out. As soon as the knife hit her in the shoulder, albeit with the blunt end, she clumsily flew upward and out of Mercy's range. She seemed to know this wasn't a battle she'd be winning. Ranger advanced, Mercy pointing up, ready to shoot her the second she came into line of sight. As he left the building, however, he wasn't ready for the shot from the side that threw him down the street. It seemed she'd taken a note from him about moving between shots. I think I got a few tricks left. She was now firing normal blasts while he rolled across the ground, spinning to his feet and then looking around for Mercy while weaving between her attacks. There was no point in trying to pick it up, he just wanted to know where it went for when this was over. After finding it and seeing it didn't look too worse for wear, he drew both his pistols and opened fire on her with both guns. It was a storm of energies from only just over 20 feet apart. Ranger continued to step back and snaked, while Najire used her flight to outmaneuver his attacks and come in from weird angles. She was doing good enough, using twists and the element of surprise to beat his superior firepower. The stalemate of before, taking turns to shoot at each other like riflemen, was gone. She was firing faster, mixing in weak attacks that he had to treat as seriously as the real attacks. She had improved since the beginning of this fight, and instead of just paying active attention to her, it was time to take Najire-chan seriously. It was time to bring out the big guns. Chapter End Notes. Yiggity yo, was Gucci. My sleep schedule, that's what's not Gucci. Let's go. I just need to put my thoughts out here, I am pretty sure Najire is the weakest of the big three. She's talked about having good control, but her usage of her quirk is basically Bakugo. Both fly with their quirk and use range attacks, but Bakugo seems better at using his in melee attacks which gives him a wider variety of situations he's useful in, mostly because he's comfortable at that range. Najire has better range, sure, but when you can fly range becomes less useful. Her attacks are also slower, like a normal person can dodge them if they're paying attention. I don't get the big three, and I really don't get how Najire is one of them, when I can look at Bakugo and think she's just a worse version of him. They're called the big three because of how strong they are, not how good they are at heroism, and that fits Bakugo to AT. I dunno, it just feels weird to me. Maybe because they use their quirks so similarly. But for all of the big three, I can't figure out how none of them were considered top of the class until their third years. Mirio I get, but why not Najire? What was she doing the first 2 years? Almost everything about the big three doesn't make sense to me, so I'll stop ranting about that. To explain what Midoriya was talking about during one of the shootouts, he said, didn't they teach you the square cube law and concentration? This is ridiculous. Midoriya was ranting about how bad her attacking method was. For the square cube law, for the smart explanation, when an object undergoes a proportional increase in size, its new surface area is proportional to the square of the multiplier and its new volume is proportional to the cube of the multiplier. When something increases in size, its mass increases more. Midoriya was ranting about how her large attacks took more energy than her normal attacks because of their larger size, which was a waste of energy. For concentration, he was talking about it also in the science definition, not the mental focus definition. Concentration is a close gathering of things. Midoriya was complaining that her power could be concentrated like she did for her larger attacks, but she wasn't for her smaller attacks. If she increased the energy while decreasing the spread of the energy, her attacks would be more powerful and faster. Well, I guess I put off defining the AEC for too long. Get ready for it to be lamer than you could possibly imagine. Chapter 83, The Anti-Everything Cross. Chapter Summary. The Big Gun. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Ranger's movement style changed, no longer bothering to fire back with his pistols as he seemed to slide along the ground, gliding like a phantom back to the overpass and that big hunk of metal he brought into this match. He used his coat to shade his legs, not letting Najire know what direction he intended to move until after the fact. As he danced and weaved between the attacks, he put kindness and Cupid into their holsters again. Najire could tell something had changed, but she couldn't tell why. This change in style put more pressure on her, encouraging her to shoot more and more while he weaved. Some of her attacks hit, but his body would swivel and slide to disperse the force. Even the attacks that had managed to hit couldn't knock him down. Hitting him from the side wouldn't force him down, her hits needed to be either more direct or more powerful. He used her attacks to throw himself around, pushing off her attacks to move faster and faster. He could now focus on her attacks entirely and see which ones were weaker, riding those out of danger. They moved down the street, and back around the corner, moving back toward his starting position. Quote. You ever heard the tale of the AEC? He wasn't doing anything fancy like flips, just stepping back and lunging around. The most complicated thing he was doing was rolling. So far. Nope. Is that a villain? Sounds ominous. She advanced, throwing attack after attack at him, showing not a single sign of weakness or being tired. She was good, better than some of the heroes he usually ditched. Shame he couldn't use his normal tactics, but that forced him to use new methods, like the AEC he wasted so much money on. Might as well fire the thing a couple of times. Quote. You know about the elephant disaster of 2077? Nope. Yeah, nobody does. 2073 started one of the worst quirk animal disasters in history. He kicked off the wall, dodging her lasers a little more fancifully now. An elephant family with a quirk called cannibal. They could eat anything, but instead of absorbing the attributes of it, they grew bigger and stronger. They were left unchecked until they had eaten everything in their habitat, and decided that humans looked pretty tasty. Oh, I see the problem. I hope you do, it's not exactly subtle. Animals can reproduce more when they have enough to eat, and since the cannibal elephants could eat anything, they multiplied like no other breed. Don't remember the exact numbers, but it was much faster than normal elephants. Those new ones ate and grew up rapidly, adding to the problem. Cities were literally eaten by elephants that were so big, tanks didn't do shit to them. One of the first major gigantification quirks too, now that I think about it. Africa was going to become as ruined as it was stereotyped to be if someone didn't do something. They could drop a nuke, but didn't want to ruin the land. So some nutjobs packed together to create the anti-elephant gun. He chuckled at the thought as he weaved through more attacks, remembering the research he did when he figured out what an AEC was. Didn't stay a gun for long though. The first models were too weak, so by the 5th version, the scientists just said fuck it. Let's make the biggest gun yet. No, fuck guns. We're gonna make a cannon, and slapped everything they could think of into one weapon to make sure it'd blow those cannibals to hell in one shot. Now he couldn't help but snicker at just how stupid the AEC development had gotten, making him stop his evasive maneuvers for just a second and nearly get himself pounded into the road. Seriously though, the development history of the AEC was more like a comedy than trying to kill a literal monster. They started skipping testing just to make it worse, and just before November of 2077, it fired for the first time. Quote. Did it work? The downpour of attacks paused for a second, Najire being oddly interested in a story about 50 scientists making as big of a gun as physically possible. Quote. Well, you tell me. He stopped dancing around and moved behind the overpass's support beam. They danced their way back to where Ranger started this mess, and leaning on the ground was his AEC. He grabbed the length of cord it was bound in and kicked it upright, standing it behind himself. Quote. That's a gun. Najire had the good sense to back off when he picked up something off the ground. Cannon, technically. Resting on the ground behind him was a 6-foot-tall metal cross, wrapped in what looked like bandages. The gunmetal gray peeked through the wrappings. It dwarfed both of them, resting against Ranger's back like a sack. I'm not responsible for any injuries you get from the AEC, so you better dodge. His leg swept the AEC off the ground behind him, planting it on the crosspiece with the bottom of the cross pointing at her. The binding cloth that covered the cross was tugged off, showing the full body of the cannon. The bottom of the cross was covered in a shell that split open to either side, exposing the barrel itself and giving her a great view as it whirled to life with a sound like a jet engine, emitting blue light and sparks while she ran for cover. Nezu squinted at the scene, amazed that he didn't know what Ronin was holding. When he first saw the giant cross, he thought it was a gun case, not a single giant gun. Well, it probably was too big to be considered a gun anymore. A cannon or some other form of artillery seemed more appropriate. He had his first match of the day with the second years, which would take place after all the third years were done. He didn't match up with any of them this time and would be sitting back, supervising everything. They usually didn't need much help, since third years were usually the most capable, but third years were also the most likely to create giant fights like this. He had done a quick Google search of the AEC when Ronin had mentioned it, but he was only finding guns attached to vehicles that didn't look like a comically large cross. Finally, he found a small snippet called Anti-Everything Cross, Test Fire Number 3. It looked like a strange test, with hundreds of test dummies lined up inside a faux city. A three-man team set up the cannon, two bracing the cross while the third aimed with a small timer counting down on screen. The words and timer were in the caption so you could read along as they went through the checks, readied everything, then right before they pulled the trigger. Everything went white, then Nezu blinked, trying to make sense of the mess that he saw on the screen. He looked at his screen, then to the camera feed right as Ronin pulled the trigger. Uh-oh. The AEC didn't just solve the elephant crisis, it put the elephants right back on the endangered list in 2 weeks. It was only after the fact that someone decided to see how safe this weapon was, now that no major cities were at risk of getting trampled and eaten. It was immediately decided that, while the AEC had been good for a weapon made in 2 months and done its job excellently, it should be banned immediately. This was decided after a firing test involving a simulated city, with thousands of test dummies lined up to see how many bodies the AEC could fire through, in case a terrorist got a hold of one. Not only did the test not answer the question, but the bullet also was never recovered, believed to be disintegrated from how fast it was launched. Ranger's AEC didn't use a bullet, since that would just be overkill, but it was still like swatting a fly with a cannon, almost literally. The AEC created a vacuum as it pulled air inside, spinning and condensing until it reached a feverish point. Electricity buzzed, the air cannon quirk not just charged, but overcharged. The air inside became so dense it began to superheat, a spinning firestorm inside a barrel. Electricity sparked, the air was dry, and the wind was spinning around the gun's barrel as Ranger pointed in the vague direction of Najire. No point in hitting her, she just needed to be smart enough to run. Ranger pulled the trigger, creating one little click before everything went to hell. The real AEC fired a custom bullet that was designed to spin and launch itself at around Mach 30, 3 times the speed of a missile and about 30 times any rational speed for something considered a bullet. It was launched with a mix of electromagnetism and explosions to force itself past the speed of reason. There was a flash of light as everything went off, and a glowing ball of superheated air blasted out of the AEC, the shockwave alone shattering all the windows in the area as the air was forced past the speed of sound, the debris being cut and melted into the mix of the fire tornadoes that flew through the air. It was a tornado of fire and wind, the air glowing with heat and turning everything it hit into rubble, torn to pieces within a flaming pillar that blossomed from a tiny little cross. Every broken piece became another bullet, thrown out with enough force to punch a hole straight through a man. It took a second just to be able to see again after such a bright flash. The scene was dead quiet other than the ringing in your ears. The street in front of him glowed with heat, the last of the debris still falling down without a sound. It took another 20 seconds or so for the ringing in everyone's ears to stop. Ranger adjusted his headset, which still couldn't block out the full impact from this close. He definitely dislocated his right shoulder again, judging by how he was 12 feet from where he started. Even though the bodysuit blocked out some of the force, the AEC overwhelmed all of his defenses. It reminded him of when he first found out about the AEC, a forum post about weapons that might be able to kill All Might. Some of the other weapons were like nukes and dropping metal beams from orbit on his head, and it seemed a stupid option. Something called the anti-elephant cannon was going to kill the #1 pro hero. It seemed stupid. Looking out over the city, though, it was clear that this might not be one the #1 pro hero would walk away from. The street in front of him was melted, asphalt and concrete tore off buildings and melted together to go flying into the distance. Street lamps were embedded in buildings, and he couldn't find an intact window anywhere. To no one's surprise, the papers were right. The AEC was not suitable for any combat inside a city, and he wasn't sure his was as strong as the real one. They each had their own advantages, but his seemed to be much less focused than a real AEC. Ranger gritted his teeth and shoved his shoulder back into place, working his arm and breathing deeply. He kicked the AEC up, shutting the barrel and opening the cross guard, removing the car battery he had to use and plugging in the backup battery, then putting the first battery away. If Najire didn't show up with some one-liner and a cheap shot at him, he'd call the match and deploy the search team. He didn't get an earpiece, but he had an alarm for if things went bad, and even though he made sure to shoot away from her, she might be injured by the collateral. The kind of power an AEC was packing wasn't unheard of in the world of heroes and villains, although it usually took a team of villains to get this kind of firepower instead of one idiot with a cannon that was over 100 years old. He could even think of one human potato who could pull it off and wouldn't nearly break his fucking shoulder to do it. God, that hurt like a bitch. He kept on working his shoulder, then flicked the binding cloths. It took 3 attempts to get the thing wrapped properly, partially because it was so massive but mostly because his right arm wasn't up to the task. He kept on working that shoulder as the storm clouds rolled in. I guess there's a reason it's called God's gun. The heat evaporated any water in the area, making a warm front and changing the weather. He didn't think it would evaporate enough water to create rain, though. It really looked like magic as the gray clouds rolled into the fake town. You could do that the whole time. At least she wasn't stupid enough to stick around when the AEC was firing. She looked like she got sent flying herself anyway though, probably from being in the air at the same time as it fired. What's your quirk? Can you do that again? Does your gun just let you do it safely? You weren't listening to the explanation about the AEC, were you? He kept on working his right arm, now moving his fingers. He shifted the AEC to his right side, wrapping the cloth between his fingers. If you're still good to go, we've got 15 more minutes. Well, it looks like you can't do that twice in a row. She charged up another blast as he stepped forward, applying a little force and twisting the cloths. The AEC spun as the cloths tried to tighten themselves, spinning like a saw and bouncing off the ground, flying up and over to crush her. Her eyes widened, and she had to step back into the side as the heavy metal crashed down where she'd been. Ranger hooked the cloth with his foot, twisting slightly as he pulled to make the cross spin again. It was wrapped in cloth as it returned to his side, and he stepped out of the cloth. Do you actually know how to fight this close? I'll try. She had to fly again to dodge the flying giant cross. Ranger was positive Aizawa made this thing out of magic. With the right pull or pluck, it would try to straighten itself out, sending whatever was caught in its folds on a wild ride regardless of weight. On a less introspective note, he had found another major flaw with Najire. Even after that giant blast, she didn't seem to be taking this seriously. Some of the roads were sticky, heated up by the AEC's blasts. It wasn't lava, asphalt just had a lower. Would it be considered a boiling point? It started melting a lot sooner than most rocks, whatever it was called. That put him, the guy who was stuck on the ground, at a disadvantage if he stepped on the melted ground. At least throwing the AEC around as a runaway kite cooled it off faster. The cross had so much weight and momentum behind it, it bashed through Najire's weak and normal attacks like the wind. He wasn't going to try attacking her with it while it was still cooling off from the first shot, that was how you gave second and maybe third degree burns. He just used it defensively while he worked his arms, spinning it with apparent ease while being so confused about how the capture scarf worked. Hey, isn't that Aizawa's scarf? How'd you get that? She kept on talking, not fully concentrating on the fight as she ran her mouth. She was now showing her better flying skills, and how slow it had to be for this level of control. It seemed she could fly much easier the slower she went, not a big surprise. She wasn't attacking with the same intent as before though, or she was starting to run out of energy. He advanced slowly. As easy as he flipped the cross around, it did have some grounding. It was all in the legs. He had always wondered why in the few fights he saw, Eraserhead's mobility disappeared the second these things grabbed something. Your body had to have a firm foundation to properly throw things around, and that meant as little leg movement as possible. You got so slow. What happened to your parkour? She figured out it was her chance and stopped to charge another big shot. If he was using the cross as his weapon, he couldn't dodge her big attacks, meaning. Ranger kept a steady eye as she made distance, removing herself from the range of his flying cross, something she definitely should have done immediately. He was considering canceling the fight just to make sure she was mentally alright because this was just bad call after bad call on her part. Now she was charging a big shot, giving him a moment to recall his cross and brace himself behind it. Do you think that that's going to stop my big attack? You better give up, Tilda, I'll take my chances. He set both pistols to rapid fire, a mode that he used exactly twice before deciding it was as useless as an umbrella with holes in it. He braced himself against the cross, sticking the pistols out from behind it. As she launched another huge wave of energy at him, he held the triggers down just to see what would happen. Instead of destroying the wave like Mercy did, Kindness and Cupid punched holes in it. Most of the wave still crashed into him, knocking him onto his ass and sending him rolling back. It took him a second to spin to his feet, letting his cross circle around him once like a flail before driving it down beside him. It seemed the pistols had the absorption power to stop her super move but didn't cover enough area. You give up yet, or you want another? He got her straight in the head that time. It didn't matter how tired she was, that was sloppy for both of them. He peppered her with hits, smothering her since he didn't bother to switch from full auto back to semi-auto. Her quirk cut out and she fell to the ground, while he kept one gun on her, dropping Cupid entirely to grab the AEC's cloth and throw the entire cross at her. Physically, without her quirk, she was in pretty good condition. But against Ranger's great physical condition, she was barely able to roll out of the free fall and sure as shit wasn't able to shake off his suppressing fire. She had to dive out of the way of the cross and wasn't looking very dignified, ducking and dodging as she tried to keep moving before that massive cross ended the fight. Hey, how are you doing that? Even now she didn't stop talking. She turned her back to him, blocking her arms from his suppressing fire while jumping into the air. She fired a beam from her hands, crashing into him back first if he didn't sidestep, and give her a kick to the side for her troubles. She still flew past him, now fighting with a strange style like she was trying to ram him with her body. She slowed herself down by putting her feet down, dragging them on the ground while she fired from both hands. It wasn't a huge attack, so the cross would be enough. With a flick of the arm and a twist of the wrist, the giant cross slammed between them before slowly tipping forward and nearly falling straight onto her. She tried to step back, but this time Ranger pulled himself forward anchoring off the cross to get close and personal. He was thrown forward like in a slingshot, barely able to stay upright and slamming into her legs headfirst. She toppled over while he kissed asphalt, spitting blood and checking his teeth weren't injured. What is this shit, amateur hour? He couldn't even say Najire was doing bad, because he was right beside her and doing terribly. He spun onto his feet, shaking his head and flinching, then resetting his nose back into place. That might leave a mark. What, trying to steal my moves? He pulled the cross towards him with a tug of the foot, hammering Najire in the back and throwing her towards him. He sidestepped his own cross, switching Kindness to semi-auto and blasting twice. Najire activated her quirk the second the cross hit, trying to fly out of the mess of Aizawa's bandaging, entangling herself with the help of a blast to the side of the head. The second shot missed entirely, and they separated completely as the rain started. Najire floated 5 feet off the ground, generating sparks around her arms while Ranger kept his gun steady and on target, working his still troubled shoulder as he played with the cords, eyes locked right as the rain started. The AEC's inspiration, and current model. Chapter and notes. Guess who published a chapter and forgot to put notes? This guy. I don't have very much to say that's relevant to the story, other than Midoriya. Ronin has yet to actually break an arm. He's falling pretty far behind the canon Midoriya in that regard, he better start catching up. Now, another rant because I love ranting. If you're just here for Ronin, stop reading because this is very irrelevant. In canon, the final exams make no fucking sense. In canon, the people who won their exams aren't those who learned something in the fight but got over internal problems. For example, Iida and Ojiro had a problem of they were one-trick ponies, using almost only hit-and-run tactics. They conquered this flaw by not spreading out, but by soloing in on it and getting so good at it they could got above and beyond, and completely abandoning the hit part of hit-and-run. Dark Shadow was a one-trick pony who could only attack. The battle was won by expanding his uses outside of what he had previously done. Momo had lost confidence but had all the tools she needed to win, and won because she regained confidence in herself and used her big brain for big gains. Ya see, the problem is the outliers. I have a few cases that I have very big issues with, and I'll rant about them here. Ochako shouldn't have won her match. In a real fight with a villain, the second she lost all grip, she would have died. She only won because this wasn't a battle to the death, and 13 didn't disintegrate her. This is why my fights had custom win conditions. For example, if Najire didn't try to dodge the AEC, Ranger wouldn't have fired it. He would have called the match off, told her she just lost, then fired the cannon to prove his point. Ochako's trick only works because it doesn't. She shouldn't have won. Zero shouldn't have lost. Zero helped Mineta get away and gave what he needed to win, a piece of tape to cover his mouth. Zero did get knocked out and didn't go to the end on his own terms, but guess what? So did Bakugo. Their match had both share their gear, split up, and defeat their hero due to the down student. They even both got carried to victory, but Bakugo passed and Zero didn't. For a different comparison, Iida didn't even get to the exit, did get captured, but because he helped his teammate he was counted as a win. Why wasn't Zero? Snipe shouldn't have lost because, from what we know about his quirk, he can shoot anything he wants to, directly cancelling out the upside to being invisible and outshooting any peering limbs. The way he lost made no sense, and only makes sense if Hagakure drugged him before the match with stupid pills. Coincidentally, the only ways I could see them winning was to either A, wait for Snipe to have to reload, which would be logical but kind of stupid, B, physically divide up, since he only has one gun and couldn't shoot it both at the same time. A good example of that would be to have Hagakure pretend to sneak out to get Snipe's gun pointed at her, then wrap him up with limbs. But the guy in that fight is so boring I can't remember his name, and I'm pretty sure they only fought Snipe because they were trying to use heroes we've already seen. Watchdog or Vlad King would have been a better fit. Oh well, adios. Chapter 84. Chapter Summary. Najire's final exam still. 10 minutes to go. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Ronin stared down Najire, adjusting his grip on kindness while Najire gauged what level of attack she wanted to lead with. The wind picked up again, blowing small pieces of rubble towards the mess of a city. The pros would probably be coming soon to put an end to this fight after the usage of the AEC. Ronin disappeared back into Ranger, hooking his foot on the capture cloth while stepping forward, sending the cross spinning with a kick. Najire stopped stalling and jumped higher into Kindness's iron sights, then continued up and over Ranger as he fired, flying over and behind him before attacking, now using both hands independently instead of making one big blast. As reckless as she was in continuing after the AEC fired, she was learning at least, even if barely. Ranger tugged the capture clothes again, switching places with the cross and letting the attacks bounce off before launching the entire cross off the ground at her. She dodged by dropping to the ground, then fired a stronger attack with both hands while jumping backward. The cross came down, both to block her attack and to try and crush her, but her own attack had pushed her out of the way. Ranger walked forward, leaving the cross in the ground while taking pot shots with Kindness. Najire fired an exchange of light shots from just her fingertips, making finger guns as she fired and proving just how little she was taking this seriously. Everything she was doing was pissing him off because he knew if they traded places, he'd win in under a minute. She dived out of the way after getting hit for the third time, throwing an attack with a kick. At least she was trying new things while fucking around. Ranger tugged at the cords, calculated the risk, and jumped back into the capture cloth, feeling the cloths tighten and drag him to the top of the cross. He nearly fell off with how hard they pulled, but he managed to make the cloths go slack in time. Now, he held Kindness with both hands and fired from above Najire. Now you're just showing off, Tilda. She laughed, then charged up another huge blast. He was stuck in place, so why not? She stepped back to let her attack spread out as far as it could, then released. Duty's call style, fourth form, crossfire. Kindness went full auto, but this time he added some aiming to the mix. Instead of just letting the bullets fly into the coming wave, he moved his wrist so none of the bullets hit the same place. This meant none of the bullets were wasted hitting the same spot as last time, and that one gun stole more energy from the attack this time than two guns did last time. Even with that, the attack still hit both Ranger and the AEC, tipping them backward. Instead of breaking his ribs or sending him flying, it just knocked him over. He wasn't even in pain as he jumped off the cross and rolled to a stop. Well, he wasn't in pain because of that last attack, anyway. Ranger rose from the roll and squared off, holding Kindness with two hands, firing while advancing. Najire tried to attack back, but her light attacks were getting shot out of the air. Even with these lighter attacks, she couldn't keep up. The shots that didn't absorb anything felt like pushes, since Kindness was still in full auto mode, but any shot that had absorbed even a bit of energy felt a lot stronger. The shots that absorbed a full attack felt like full-on punches. Najire was beginning to feel her consciousness slipping. Ranger was too strong. His attacks overwhelmed hers, were faster than hers, and from the way he moved, his body was also better trained than hers. She tried to fly away, but the pepper of shots ate away any energy she tried to create, forcing her to run away the old-fashioned way, with her legs in the ground. Ranger wasn't even bothering to chase, just switching from full auto to semi-auto and keeping up the suppressing fire. She could at least run faster than he was moving, but anytime she tried to fly a well-aimed shot would clip her leg. It was because of how obvious it was when she started to use her quirk, giving Ranger a clear target and window of time to shut her down. She cut behind a building, ducking through alleys and forgetting to start flying from how many times it had failed in the last 20 minutes, and even when she remembered, she wasn't sure she had the energy to. She had used so many large attacks in such a short time. Those huge attacks usually spelled victory for her, but Ranger tore straight through anything she threw at him like it was nothing, and would keep going until he tore straight through her too. She looked over her shoulder and kept running. She was trying to put a bright spin on this like Mentor Yuki said to, but for the first time in years, she felt inadequate. How could she beat a guy who could blow up cities if he wanted, who was letting her get away, who just toyed with her the entire fight? Najire was too tired to think. She needed a break, but she didn't have time for a break. She settled for a moment to breathe and drink, trying to give herself a minute while she thought over the fight, thinking of any way she could win. Ranged combat. Range was literally in his name. Ranger's attack seemed to absorb energy, and since he could shoot faster than her, for every shot she put out he would always counterfire, his shots absorbing her attacks and turning them against her. Melee combat. She could try a straight rush, but with that giant cross at his beck and call, she'd break a few bones even if she took him down on the first go, and there was no way in hell that would happen. At least she could try to smother him, overwhelming him before capturing him. It seemed the best bet. She finished off her water bottle, now wishing she had packed a little more for when she ran out of energy in a fight. She didn't usually have fights this long, or even half as long. Every time she lost before this, every defeat she had in her second and third years, they were all for the same reason, she ran out of energy. She thought she finally conquered that problem, but Ranger was here to prove her wrong. She had managed to last over 20 minutes of constant attacking, well over double her previous best, but Ranger just kept going. He didn't even seem tired, throwing around that giant cross like it was a cardboard box with only one arm. He even let some attacks land, showing off how little she could actually do to him. He wasn't just not a faux villain, he wasn't even a villain. Ranger was a monster. Najire didn't want to admit it, but she wasn't scared. She was terrified. Something was coming, its steps getting closer, carrying an odd tune on the breeze. She slowly looked down the road at the figure approaching. He whistled, off-key and offbeat, spinning a set of pistols on his fingers as he approached. She took an involuntary step back at the sight of him. His bandana that covered most of his face had small splotches of dark stains, his mask underneath hiding his identity like a cross between the Lone Ranger and a Western bandit. Behind him, that massive cross covered in bandages trailed. She tried to calm her breathing, tried to focus, and tried to prepare to fight, but she couldn't even manage to do a single one of those. Ranger stopped spinning his guns and cut the whistling. His duster was soaked in the rain, the heavy winds pushing the coat aside and showing that his shotgun had returned to his leg. While she had been panicking, he had collected all his weapons and was ready to fight again. The rain was pouring now, darkening the entire scene. She wasn't sure she could even make out a face underneath that hat. Tired. That single word didn't sound as cruel as he usually did, probably because he was evaluating if she had already lost and it was time to call it quits on this fight. It felt detached. I can still go on. She took a deep breath and faced him down, eyeing the distance. Can go on doesn't mean should go on. He gave her a once-over, flicking water droplets off his hat. You wasted too much time at the beginning of the fight and didn't think about the long term. What would happen if you had to fight another villain after this? 2 more villains. She tried to adjust her stance, tried to pick a way to go at him, but his defense looked as solid as ever. Unlike her, who tried to use her super move over a dozen times, he had used his big move once. She might have always been attacking first, but she never seemed to take the lead in the fight. You overspent yourself. I'm only telling you this because I'm supposed to give you a spiel after the fact about what you did, but I'm gonna be honest. I hate you, and I'm not going to spend a single extra moment dealing with you. He was still advancing, a pistol in each hand. She was going to be forced to take action soon, so she should act before it was too late. She rushed forward, creating an energy wave in her right hand, intending to get as close as possible and hit him with it from a range he couldn't block. You're a combat hero who doesn't get combat and is a liability. You're worthless in a one-on-one fight. You fight better when the opponent is distracted. Guess what? Everyone does. The pistols were holstered under his arms as she sprang forward, stretching out an arm to try and touch him. If she could just touch him, she could win. Ronin snorted as the persona of Ranger was discarded, not even bothering to grab her arm but stepped into her charge with a rear leg front kick, swinging both arms back to generate as much power as possible as he kicked her in the stomach. Her momentum was stopped dead as Ronin was forced back a single step, leaving Najire choking and coughing while stumbling around, trying to regain her bearings. The first thing you need to do in combat is control yourself. Control your emotions, control your body, and control your thoughts. Ronin shook his head, watching the mess in front of him with something between disgust and pity. She had gone all the way from a joke to a threat to a proper challenge, and now to an insult all within the same fight. He didn't need his guns for this. After you control yourself, control the battlefield. You were given the authority to destroy the surroundings but didn't capitalize on it, only attacking head-on. No clever flying tricks, no changing the terrain to benefit you, just shooting until you couldn't shoot anymore. She stopped stumbling and tried to tackle him. If he had to guess, she was assuming he'd be bad in close quarters, showing she didn't pay attention to her opponent and leading to the next thing he was going to berate her for. Once you control the battlefield, you can control your opponent, something you never came close to doing. His boots could have anchored him in place, easily letting him resist her charge, but he turned them off. He wasn't going to use a single quirk at this point. She rammed into him, driving her shoulder into the arm he protected his stomach with, his mostly undamaged left. That same left arm then grabbed her as he was forced backward 2 more steps, then held in place as he drove a knee into her stomach, stopping her forward progress in a single hit. You never forced me to do anything. I always had options. I could dodge. I could shoot through your attack shell. I could just cap you in the head. He dragged her upright with his left and clubbed her with an open-handed haymaker to the head, letting go as his right struck and sending her sprawling backward. He shook his hand, thinking over his next move while she struggled to stay standing. You've got 6 minutes. 6 minutes to beat me. He stood confidently, slipping out of his jacket and removing both Yamato and Mercy, wrapping them up before placing them on the ground. I'm tired of this back and forth. We're ending this now. Hurry up and pass, or hurry up and fail. Najire shook her head and raised her hands to shoot another blast at him, but they were in his terrain. The buildings here had been shattered, the road warped and debris from what had once been buildings and lights littered the ground. Rain soaked everything, turning the road into a slippery hell. Ronin stepped forward as she tried to charge and soccer kicked a rock into her stomach, making her double over at the last second and blast the ground, throwing herself onto her back. Najire flew up and back, hanging in the air for a few seconds before crashing back first into the ground, the shock freezing up her body for a second as she gave a suffocated scream in pain. After her scream, she stopped all movements to try and catch her breath, trying just to stay alive. She groaned as she tried to get up, rolling onto hands and knees and breathing for a moment. She turned her head to look at him but got a soccer-style kick to the stomach again, sending her up and back. While Najire staggered to her feet, trying to breathe, Ronin looked the epitome of calm. He kept his anger out of his hits, using it instead to crush the sense of pain in his arm and face. Najire screamed, trying to get some energy while she ran forward, generating energy over her fingers like claws and swiping furiously at him. Opposite her last stand, Ronin looked the same as he always did. Bored, reading her moves and making sure he had to spend as little energy as possible. While her new use of her quirk could be useful, it had come too late. He stepped past each attack, admiring the colors as the yellow lines from her hands only hid rain. It sure looked beautiful. A shame it was so pathetic. Letting this continue any further felt insulting to both of them. She had to stop again, regaining more energy to attack again. That was when Ronin stepped in again. His leg sprung forward and struck her in the stomach again, hitting almost the exact same spot as before. His bored detachment as he gave up on this fight becoming even remotely difficult helped him pick his target, drilling her with a second and third kick to the same place. She spit out her first bit of blood after that combo. You still want to continue? He remembered to ask her when she wanted to give up, since this was quickly turning into a checklist for him. Ask if she wanted to go on, dodge whatever she came up with, then keep railing her stomach. I'm not done. Another kick to the stomach, this time a side kick instead of all those front kicks from before. That one had some power and actually pushed her back a little, knocking her back on her ass. But you should be. He laid his opinions out clearly, he would not be pulling any punches with this until she gave up. His attacks weren't even using superhuman strength or incredible speed. They were just compact, tight attacks that he had practiced for hours, that couldn't be beaten by some ass pull technique she thought of while barely standing. I can still win. It was absurd that she was so intent on winning. No one would look down on her for losing, especially once everyone knew Ranger was Ronin, which seemed inevitably, and continuing at your own risk was just stupid. Nothing could be gained by pressing yourself this far. There were no civilians to rescue, no city to save, no point in continuing this beatdown other than because you wanted to. The city. It had already been destroyed. She'd failed to save it. The people. If they hadn't evacuated by now, they'd either be running on their own or dead. No, she wasn't trying to do anything grand or heroic. She was just trying to win a fight that she had no hope of winning from the moment she started, not because of who her opponent was, but because she did almost everything wrong from the word go. Najire stomped, creating a shockwave through her foot and forcing him to take a few steps on the slick road. While he stumbled, she charged again. Her eyes were unfocused, only caring about this exact moment, risking it all to try and win. Was this what he had been like? Only focused on winning the battle in front of him? When he first met Mao, trying to tear through an entire organization instead of trying to step back and get help. It might have made sense at the time, but hindsight was 20/20. Damn. Midoriya chuckled a bit, then hit the ground. Nejire was charging, handcuffs flying in the rain as she tried to topple the wall in front of her. That moment seemed to stretch forever for the one on the ground, looking up at her. He could lie there for just a moment longer. She'd grab him, handcuff him, and her raw passion would overcome her faults, giving her the win. All he had to do was nothing. But if he did that, would she grow from this? Would she learn more from a hard-earned victory, or a crushing defeat? He didn't know. He couldn't. But he had to make that call anyway. The man rose from the rainwater legs first, kicking her straight over him. She flew through the air, her eyes watering. She'd been so close. She was nearly there. Come on, hero. The man tossed that stupid hat to the side, standing fully upright now. He got into a real fighting pose. Mao had taken some brat with a piece of garbage sword seriously to the end. What would he be if he trampled on the ideals he was first founded on? You've still got 5 minutes left, and you haven't fallen yet. Nejire got her feet under her, breathing heavily while looking at the man in front of her. Not a wall, not some monster, but the man. A shake of the head, and an even shakier smile, but she faced him again. I'm not done yet. Heroism is a verb, you know, so stop telling me. He snickered, thinking of a certain green-haired brat who got kicked around a gangster's lair, who ran through the sewers while badly injured, only moving through a force of will. Damn, he really was annoying to fight. Show me. Nejire charged again, swinging her fists at him with all the coordination of a drunkard. His footwork kept him nice and safe, weaving through her attacks. Good. Keep applying pressure, but use your feet. Get a solid stance. She adjusted her feet, pushing aside the small bits of rubble, and kept on flailing. She now kept up with him easier, her attacks no longer forcing her to overreach. He countered one of those flailing attacks, hitting her in the stomach with a well-focused punch. Remember defense. Protect yourself first, attack someone else second. Get your body under control. She had staggered back from the hit, but when she returned her attacks were much more well-paced. No longer a flurry of flails, but having a real rhythm as she worked to block his counterattacks and throwing some counters of her own. What the hell happened to your quirk? Did you lose it? If you're too tired, stall. Don't just move to hit. He let her next punch slide off of him, trading it for a kick at her stomach. She activated her quirk on the hand that slid off his defense, clawing at him and forcing him to abandon his kick to dodge her attack. She didn't use her quirk with every attack, a testament to how tired she was, but she was using it again, working it into her attacks to keep him working on his defense. The light and focus had returned to her eyes as she worked, weaving attacks together and adding in her quirk to force him to defend. Her claw attack actually hit, drawing blood as she slashed through the bodysuit. Come on. The man spurred her onward, ignoring his own injuries to force her to keep evolving. He stepped into her attacks, taking 2 more slashes just to get a proper grip on her arm and throw her. His left grabbed her arm by the wrist, his right grabbed her shoulder, and together they threw her down the street. She rolled across the rubble, coughing and spitting blood but getting her legs under her. She came forward again, her smile once again genuine as she created one final blast of energy. The man couldn't help but smile underneath the bandana, seeing the last buildup of energy. He ran straight into it, breathing out as he focused completely on her arms. Full charge, output level 20, she slowly raised both arms towards him, palms out. Violence number, Savage Oni style. He dashed across the ground, bringing both arms in front of himself as if to try and muscle out the blast. Spiraling surge. 5th style. Right as she prepared to release the energy, he reached her. His arms, which had been covering his body and head, snapped forward and shoved her arms to either side as they collided headfirst with each other. Bullish. Nejire's blast still fired, throwing her backward as the man's arms came back together, throwing 2 simultaneous hooks at where her body had just been. She stood wearily but ready, the 2 forces begin to approach again when. BRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRRR notes. Yo, this fight was a fun boomerang of emotions, and I'll go straight into it. The music might be a little whack, having so much music in one chapter, but it's an experiment. Each one was chosen because I like the message it sent and how it lined up with the fight. Let me know how it went. Ronin usually isn't the protagonist in any of the fights he's in. He's a character, but he usually takes the role of an antagonist. This was the first time we see him really play the role of the villain, in this mob's opinion. Hoping you enjoyed it. Adios. Chapter 85. Chapter Summary. Najire loses by timeout. Najire paused for a moment, stunned, then slowly took it in. As close as she had gotten, she still wasn't good enough. Another moment of rest, then she stood up, laughing it off. Oh well, thanks for the fight. You shouldn't be so quick to brush it off. Ranger rubbed his back, getting some of the gravel unstuck before picking up his things. You don't have to bounce back from everything. It's fine to take a second and think things over. She didn't look at him while he put back on his coat, or she didn't look directly at him. Hey, why are you here anyway? Did Nezu ask you to come INOH? Were you arrested, and they said if you beat me you got to go free? That's why you were so mean at the start. Keep enjoying those fantasies of yours. I'm only here because I was asked to be. He finished resetting his belt, patting everything down before grabbing the giant cross by the straps and pulling it upright again. You need to take things more seriously. Being happy and peppy is great and all, but throwing yourself to your death with a smile is what most people would call psychotic. I didn't die. You would've. Your ability to control yourself is terrible. You lack restraint. I've got plenty of restraint. She scoffed, pouting as they walked back to the exit. Then you need plenty more. Ranger dragged the giant cross-gun thing with his left arm, moving his right in small circles. You have tons of stamina, sure, but you release too much energy. I'm not saying you should start every fight with that stupid poking attack, but you rely on too much power. Get some more options, learn some more attacks besides how big of a laser you're firing. All in all, you have great control over one method of using your quirk, but not great control over your entire quirk. What you can do is impressive, but if you spread out and learn some new applications, you'll be better off. Ranger glanced up at her, peering with green eyes from under his big hat. You already are a good hero, but don't settle for good. Become a great hero. What? You can compliment people too, my god. You're shorter than me. She leaned down to get on his level, laughing. Ya no, Ranger, outside of combat, you're not so bad. I'm not shorter, I'm dragging a 300-pound cross. And tired. How are you so peppy already? He shook his head, taking a step away from her as she took a step closer to him. She didn't answer that question but kept exchanging quick lines as they exited the ruined city. She might have failed this time, but by her last test, she'd get him so good Ranger wouldn't even know what hit him. The groups had formed back up in the parking lot by the buses. Most of the people there were the heroes and students who finished early, the students and the heroes they fought splitting off to form their own groups and talk about how it went. They'd write their reviews when they had a moment to spare, either at their agencies or when they got back to UA. Ranger was inside the bus again, trying to use the AEC as a table to write his review of Najire on. It was a little unruly, but he thought the writing was still legible. That was what he got for writing on a giant cross he could barely balance. He checked over his work, glancing outside. The clouds had been moving sporadically, but now he could see why. Just 3 cities over, All Might and some blonde kid that he'd sworn he'd seen before came out from their faux city. Or, it had been a faux city. The entire thing was so destroyed it made the AEC's work look neat. That blonde kid seemed to make All Might go all out. He'd be one to keep an eye on in the future, although right now, from this distance, not even Midoriya could figure out who he was, let alone Ranger. He'd ask Nezu the next time they met. For now, he was tired, he was in pain, and he was ready to leave. He'd give Nezu the papers, then teleport away. Even with the wheels he installed on the AEC, the thing was still heavy as hell. At least Blonde Boy and All Might had helped to clear up the weather, the rain was already mostly gone and the clouds just started to part. Ranger sat back with his dumb-looking cross, adjusted his right arm, and waited. A certain furry fucker was bound to show up, and when he did, he could ask his questions, drop off the papers, and get moving. The less time he spent at UA, the better. Nezu surveyed the damage to each area, giving an estimate on how long it'd take to fix. There had been many fights so far, and it wasn't the best choice for them to try and spend the rest of the day fixing them up when there were still more fights to come. Most were in favorable condition, but 2 cities had been destroyed, and that was precisely the problem. Originally, he wanted to get on Ronin's case and at least negotiate the usage of that gun he brought in, the AEC. However, 3 cities over, Mirio had been learning how to use One for All, and had leveled the city with All Might. Made the AEC look pretty weak, actually. Because he knew Ronin, he was sure Ronin would point that out. It was obvious that there had been buildings inside that area not even 1 hour ago, and now there was only rubble. Mirio had been specifically told not to hold back, since this was about safely exploring his limits, and he hadn't gotten a report from All Might on how the boy fared. He entered the bus that'd take everyone back to UA, following the giant cross he could see through the window. He was sitting in the front, massaging one of his shoulders with the AEC next to him. His face was hidden beneath his big hat and bandana. Quote. Nezu. Ronin took the lead over the conversation as soon as he noticed Nezu. My report on the blue gumball. He stopped messing with his shoulder and stood, stepping out of the seat and handing the smaller figure a small set of papers. It hadn't even been 5 minutes, and Ronin had filled out all 3 pages. He didn't write much on each page, but it still was a lot. Ah, thank you. And thank you for coming in today, you really helped us. He didn't think Najire would lose as badly as she did. Towards the end of the test she had completely broken down, and the only reason she lost by timeout was that Ronin didn't knock her out. He at least tried to help her learn before the clock ran time. Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to test this thing. He nodded to the AEC and stretched his right shoulder. He seemed to have injured it, but Nezu didn't remember Najire ever hitting that part of him. He continued to answer Nezu's question before he could even ask it. I don't think I'll be using it like this again. Quote. Use it like this, like a whip, or a flail. Nezu tried to piece together exactly what he meant by getting Ronin himself to say it. He wanted to know what Ronin meant, not what Ronin said. This version of the AEC is pointless. He pulled it upright, ready to go outside now that the rain had stopped. It's too strong. I don't have a use for it other than to blow up battleships and kill All Might, but it's so heavy he'd blow me away before I could aim the thing. Ronin wrapped his fingers inside the capture cloth, getting a solid grip before facing Nezu on. Quote. I think Ranger might disappear for a while. I don't like this fighting style, and I don't like guns. He'll come back when I get something worked out, but until then, you won't have to worry about any AECs blowing up the city. Ronin walked straight past him, making Nezu dodge out of the way of the giant cross. Quote. Not even a contract. All I have is your word. All I have is your word that you won't spill my real identity. Now we're even. Nezu seemed to remember something along those lines early, and it infuriated him a little bit. Was this how Midoriya felt when he got that letter? Now, adios. Ronin walked out of the bus, carrying that giant cross as he walked down the road. The sun broke the clouds, light bouncing off the slick and shiny road. His coat billowed, the cross glinted in the sunlight, and someone was whistling. Nezu had to admit, at that moment, he looked pretty cool. Until 10 minutes later when the buses passed him, and he was still walking along the road carrying the cross. It was still Friday, and Ronin had it mostly to himself. His right shoulder had been dislocated again, but it wasn't the first time he dislocated it while on the job. It wasn't even the 3rd time he dislocated it in his life. Maybe he just had weak joints. He walked out of UA, taking in the cityscape for a second or two before heading down the road with a giant cross in tow. To be honest, he was sick of being Ranger. It wasn't just the lack of risk from shooting people from 50 feet away with a set of pistols, it was the lack of finesse. He lacked control, the ability to dilate his abilities as he worked. You couldn't pull punches with a gun, you could just shoot somewhere less important. He did find out some useful things about his weapons, like how Ranger at first seemed best at fighting people who could only fight up close and personal but was actually the best at fighting energy attacks. The absorption part of air cannon made taking down those types of quirks a cinch. People stared and pointed at the madman with the giant cross walking down the road, but ultimately everyone made way for him. He didn't notice. He had bigger fish to fry. He had been putting off a lot of things, but with his latest shoulder injury, it was time to do a few of them. Finish the book for All for One. Get around to switching the last parts of his arsenal to possessed weapons. Hang out with Eiko. He'd start with the book. That was supposed to be due soon, so better get it done quickly and let AFO know. He planned his course, knowing he'd end up at the school either way, but first, he had to drop the cross off to a certain muscle-brained idiot who he promised could fire at once. Midoriya breathed a sigh of relief after wrapping his shoulder up for support. While anime had people wrapped in bandages constantly as a fashion statement, martial artists had a real use for it. It was to support limbs that weren't as strong as the rest, in his case, his shoulder. It had been way too difficult to do on himself, so instead he did it on Deku Dummy and then Ru wrapped it on himself. With the knots taken care of, it was much easier to get on. All that was left were a few quick adjustments, and he was good to go. But he wasn't back in school to think about wrappings, he wasn't here to think about binding. That could have been phrased better. Midoriya slowed his breathing as he stacked up the homemade papers and punched the needle through each. The needle brought the thread through, tying stacks of papers together to create packets. The packets were brought together, also sewn together, to form the pages. From there he applied glue to secure everything together, keeping the threads stuck tightly together and plastered down so they didn't get in the way. He next punched holes in leather, adding a layer of leather to both sides of the forming book, and gluing the ends of the string into it, although the strings were so thick at that point it was more like thin rope. After gluing it down, he stuck a second sheet of leather over both leather sheets and what would be the spine of the book, sealing it first by punching holes then gluing it together, sealing the mess with more string. The book was, practically speaking, finished. There would be no gem this time, just small detail work. With a knife and an hour, Midoriya brought the book to life, following the instructions included in this order. Kurogiri had sent it to him after the fact, detailing what the book was supposed to look like. The last book had been dyed until practically black with a dark gem to complement it, while this one was to be a more natural tone. Deep brown and slightly muddy, it wasn't even an entirely uniform color. Midoriya thought it looked the right kind of shabby, looking messy while still being functional and not at risk of falling apart if shaken too fast. Midoriya wrapped it up to make sure it looked all nice and pretty when it got presented, and was safe enough to survive most accidents that might happen before then. He packed it away and got to thinking, planning what he wanted to do next. After delivering this thing, he wanted to get the rest of his arsenal upgraded. That meant he'd need to create the normal equipment first from the right material, then go to get it finished with some help from the world's most dangerous potato. The problem was the combination. When he made a possessed item he had to think about what quirks would be a good fit. He could get a rough idea of what he wanted, or just make the weapon and find a quirk that fit the weapon. That's where the problem started. All the rest of the equipment that was left was too complicated. For example, the needles. Making a single needle have a quirk was stupid, unless it was something like a multiplication quirk, and even then that was pretty useless because the needles were too small to put batteries in and have them still fly straight. This meant he'd have to see what quirks AFO was offering, picking a quirk and designing the weapon to suit it. The needles and jacket would need a quirk that fit them, and from there he could design the item to fit whatever quirk he found, like if he found a quirk that needed muscles to work, he could make his next jacket out of some sort of muscle. Maybe. He'd need to get more, and he wasn't sure it'd work correctly. The fact that the bodysuit didn't fall to pieces still amazed him. He could do it like how he used to. Pick a quirk, theorize and design around it. Oh yeah, the Kanabo needed a quirk too. Kinda forgot it existed. Midoriya shook his head, chuckling and trying to remember the last time he used the Kanabo. It felt like an eternity, but he could tell why the thing wasn't used in war for very long. Just like the AEC, too heavy and impractical. At least the AEC could level buildings though. He stopped thinking about all the weapons he could make, putting everything that was left away and going to a certain golf course. He had things to do, messages to leave, and shouldn't just stick around thinking all day. All for One didn't give the laboratory a second glance as he strode through it, despite the unnerving things shuddering and screaming just feet away. Massive bodies contorted by quirks, both the ones he shoved into them and the ones the doctors used to make them. Nomu creation had become easier than ever with the introduction of possessed items, allowing for All for One to not have to lend quirks to doctors or be there in person, using his powers to twist bodies into monsters. The usage of animals to turn into Nomus was another great step forward. Not because it was ethical, well, more ethical, but because no one gave a damn. Midoriya showed him that when he started hunting bears left and right, and not one soul batted an eye. Gave an increase in production, and allowed them to experiment more. Quote. Give me the news, doctor. How are the high ends coming? All for One didn't ask questions, he demanded answers. Even those that worked for him knew not to push him too far. Excellently. They can retain their intelligence while being reprogrammed for new purposes. But, the doctor nodded to some of the containers, where he could see Nomus so feral they even tore themselves apart. It seems to be a phenomenon only humanoid Nomus can go through. We're trying with apes in 2 days. Excellent. I've been waiting a long time for this, I don't want to bring her out of ice just for her to go ballistic. It'd lose the impact it'd lose some of the impact. It would have its own twist I suppose. All for One paused to think things through, chuckling at the thought. This moment had been coming for years, and the plan was shifting. If his brother taught him anything, it was to never only think of one solution to a problem. I must ask, is it really necessary to lend all of these to Shigaraki? The doctor gestured around to the Nomus they'd be sending to attack UA's little camp. It seemed a waste of their work, and they were still making more. The doctor knew it wasn't good to push All for One, but the number one villain was confident and smart enough to answer and listen to his advisors. It's what he paid them for, after all. All for One didn't move on until he could give his supporters a satisfying answer. It is essential that he uses them. For the final victory, we have to refocus ourselves. Too long we've been trying to win the battle, but soon this whole war will end. He was still walking and didn't stop until he was in front of a glass tube where he kept his greatest weapon, kept alive on machines and quirks, just like him. He ran a hand along the glass, clearing the condensation. The procedure was nearing the end. He'd lost so much, but of all the things he lost, he managed to save one thing. He sensed the slow breathing, the pump of blood, and the body functioning. But the body was just a shell now, aesthetics. The mind had scarcely a single thought inside, kept alive by machines. For all their differences in life, they ended up the exact same. Soon, sir. We got the report on UA's finals, as you asked. The room went silent as the lackey interrupted All for One. The scientists took steps back in a panic. All for One slowly turned, eyeing the man. The air was frigid from the machines alone, but the look on his face seemed to drop the temperature another 100 degrees. Quote. Go on then. What are the results? The man was shaking as he thought over what he'd accidentally done, and continued onward. 3 of the areas were destroyed, sir. 2 third-year fights in the second year. He read over the files again to make sure he got everything right. Did you want the names of students and heroes involved? Quote. That was your objective, wasn't it? Keep going, Steven. I didn't call you here to see you implode. That'll just be a sideshow if you keep fucking up. With such a cheery undertone to help him along, the lackey continued. The third-year fights were Ranger vs Najire-chan and All Might vs Mirio, and, very good. It seems you innards will stay on the inside a little longer, Steven. He gave Steven a pat on the back, smiling. You've done well. You can go now. The goon ran for the door after bowing with nary a glance back. All for one gave one last glance at his special project, then the 100 Nomus prepared for Shigaraki's attack on the summer camp. It would seem overkill now, perhaps, but in the end, all would be necessary. He thanked the doctor for his time, leaving him to finish his own preparations. Kurogiri accompanied him from the door back into his hideout, helping him plug back in. He felt strength flowing into his body, smiling as his loyal servant went through the checks. You're looking better. Flattery, Kurogiri. At your age, you're shameless. Perhaps as a testament to just how powerful he was, even his jokes could sound intimidating. His body was racked with pain as he was plugged in, but he still had enough energy to spare to poke fun at his subordinate. It's true. Are you going to follow the plan to the very end? Kurogiri finished plugging him in, and All for One laughed again. I think we both know a certain person who will throw everything off. It wasn't just fatherly pride, but a fact. Ronin operated so differently from heroes and vigilantes he had carved out his own title. It was no wonder he was called the super vigilante. With no hard rules, an offbeat schedule, and his strange techniques, he would definitely reshape the plan. Still, we can adjust. I'm almost ready myself, although even I can see what'll happen next. Although. There was a strange sound, like leather and meat being torn in half as slowly and painfully. All for One's eyes opened for the first time in years. His eyes hadn't lost a speck of focus in all these years, still staring ahead, always planning ahead. I think it might be fun to watch. Chapter 86. Chapter Summary. Ranger finished beating up Najire while pretending it was training, and has hung up his hat for the foreseeable future. With his injured shoulder, Ronin has turned introspective and is going to, albeit briefly, focus on finishing up his current arsenal. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. He looked across the various weapons and armors he'd built throughout the year, each varying in quality and condition. Some had tons of damage on them, like what had once been Mao's jacket, while others were never good in the first place, like his bulletproof pants thing. There were a lot of pieces that would need a rework. Midoriya sat in the classroom, marveling at how empty the school was. A normal school would have at least a few people here at almost all times, for clubs or something, but in Ishiyama people only showed up to beat the shit out of each other. He stopped staring out the window and closed the drapes, then pulled his equipment from their various hiding spots. First up, his jacket. He had a lot of jackets over the years and they never seemed to stick. He wanted a jacket, and he could make it even better now that he had been getting more practice. Next, the needles. He still didn't have a clue what he was going to do with them, but he probably should try. Maybe he'd think of something when he saw the list of quirks possible for the taking. Third, Muramasa. He'd need to replace the blade, but otherwise, this was the easiest weapon. If Yamato was anything to go by, making magic swords was one of the easier weapons. Still, he thought he'd modeled a new blade after the old one since that serrated edge was pretty impressive. Fourth, his Kanabo. Hadn't used that thing in forever, but it should be pretty easy to adapt. It was made from wood with small studs, meaning it could have almost any body part put in. If he found a quirk that only worked with teeth, he'd just put it into a bare head and plug the teeth in where the studs had been. Same for bone or claws, and he could wrap the Kanabo in other materials, like muscle. All in all, the weapon he rarely used would be pretty easy to upgrade to. He checked the time, comparing it to the note he picked up at the golf course on his way in. It was time to stop lollygagging. He packed up and shipped out with the package, going to his favorite golf course. Inside the bathrooms, there was a man in. Oh god, what was he wearing? Quote. Ronin. Kurogiri gave him the once-over from behind his giant shutter shades, adjusting them like glasses. Quote. Kurogiri. Ronin could look past the giant white t-shirt with an image lazily plastered on the front, he could look past the khaki pants even, but he couldn't look past the knee-high socks and flip-flops. It was physically impossible for him. Right this way, if you please. Kurogiri was smiling, he was sure of it. Ronin went along anyway, shaking his head as he moved past. He walked into the mist and stepped into what seemed to be some sort of throne room. It looked that way to him, anyway. All for one sat on a big chair with hundreds of tubes in him and faced the entire room. There were tons of computers behind him, their screens currently showing static. The big man himself seemed to be sitting a little higher than last time they met. You're looking healthy, sir. He made some small talk while he got the package out of his bag, holding it out while All for One brought it over with a wave of his hand. He skimmed over the pages, unable to see without eyes but feeling them with his hands, and probably sensing them with some quirks. He expected that the boss had a few great quirks he acquired over the years, especially since he could take quirks from dead bodies. Almost every great hero who had a legitimate burial probably got a visit from him eventually. Kurogiri said the same thing. This is good work, Ronin. He shook the book in one hand to emphasize his point. You said in your note that you want to speed up your production, yes. How many possessed items do you want to make? Just one to start, but I'll definitely need more. I'm going to be replacing my jacket again. He bowed slightly to show his respect as he spoke. I'd like to look at the quirks you're offering, so I can design my next items around them. Quote. You might want to hurry up then. All for One didn't elaborate on that much, breaking to tell Kurogiri to get the list. I don't want to alarm you, but I'm not staying in Japan forever. You've got about 1 month left, then I'm cutting ties with Japan. He'll be going on to serve Shigaraki. He nodded to Kurogiri. You remember him? Blue hair, lots of hands. He's forming a league of villains to try and uphold my legacy. Seems too generous. Take over when you're gone. All for One nodded, smiling. Even if they don't know that's what they're doing. My absence will create a void, one other villains will strive to fill, creating a new crime wave that will sweep this whole world. As will that bigot's retirement. His anger at All Might was palpable. Quote. I Belivea, the list is here. Ronin took the list, reading through each of the quirks. He'd want something versatile, an item that most people wouldn't figure out easily what its quirk really was. I've already got the bodysuit for defense, but it can't block the AEC's full force, so should I try to get another defensive quirk? I've still got some muscle left over, so maybe instead I can add the muscle back to the bodysuit. The regeneration might make it come together easily. Midoriya mumbled through, reading the list and noting that it wasn't tailored to quirks that would just be helpful on a jacket. Some of these would be good to implant into a person, like mutation quirks, and others would be good for weapons instead of armor. He stopped on one. It wasn't what he came here for, but he could work it. That quirk also answered what he wanted to do for his needles, and it should be the first time he mixed materials. Can I reserve a quirk? He read through it, nodding along as he read more details on the quirk. I would like that one. It floated from his hand, hovering in front of All for One. He wasn't sure how All for One could read, but it was probably a quirk. If he didn't understand it, guessing it was a quirk was a safe bet. Quote. Porcupine. A mutant quirk. Yes, it can be arranged. Do you want our orders all at once? I'll take 3, please. He bowed again to show his gratitude. All for One laughed, but slowly trailed off. Rise. Here are the orders, but I have something I want to tell you. I want you first to know I'm not trying to win you over. I'm leaving in a month anyway and it's a little late for that. All for One couldn't seem to meet his gaze, finding the glass tube very interesting as he stared at it. This is the next part of that story I told you last time. Do you want to hear it? Quote. Should I? Quote. I don't know, but I think you deserve to. Then I'll listen. Quote. Did you know about hidden quirks? Quirks that have no physical tell, but do exist within the body, unable to be activated. They're so hard to find, they don't have a real name. They can't be activated, don't show up in the medical traces, only abilities that can detect quirks can find them, and even then, it's difficult to tell what they do. Quote. Are you saying I have one number? All for One at least didn't let him get his hopes up and kept him grounded. You are truly quirkless, however, the brother in my story last time was not. His quirk, One for All, was a hidden quirk that allowed him to pass his quirk on to others willingly. With that one statement, the entire picture came into focus. Quote. He was given a stockpile quirk, and could naturally pass on quirks. Yes, you've seen where it's going. One for All didn't just steal their lives, but their quirks as well. It took them, gave them more power than they could imagine, then left them broken. All for One closed his eyes, remembering the sight of his brother the second time they met after he passed on his quirks, how different he looked. He was unrecognizable. The body grows dependent on the quirk, and when it's taken, it's quite painful mentally, beyond the pain of rewriting the body. The more quirks you get, the worse it gets. But enough of my rambling. I wanted you to know the other side of One for All, and more importantly to you. Kurogiri, the medical records. Kurogiri seemed to know this part was coming, offering a file to All for One who turned it down, shaking his head, then the smoky man offered it to Ronin. Ronin wasn't sure what he was supposed to do when he looked at All Might's birth records. He skimmed through it, snorting slightly when he thought he found what the old man was talking about. He's Japanese. Who could have? Quote. How many people know? His original doctor, but that man's either been paid or long since dead. The principal of UA, who knew him before and after he got One for All. A few police. His former apprentice, Night Eye. The current heir. Quote. He already gave it away. He's lining himself up to die by my hands, like some sort of urge that got locked into the quirk. It's like the original suicidal tendencies got stuck inside, and they're all trying to see who can die the most gorily. Giving away the quirk not only passes it on, but it also takes your old quirks until you have nothing left. It drains you dry, then moves on to the next victim. Quote. Who's the next heir? A third year at UA, Mirio Tagata, the rising hero Lemillion. Kurogiri, pass his file. The boy took the papers, reading through them slowly. His quirk, permeation, allows him to move through solid matter. Alone, it's quite the powerful quirk, but inside of One for All, it's just another shiny trinket. The future users might not even be able to get it. Might not, so not every user can access every quirk it has. All for One nodded. The boy was learning fast. Compatibility, temperament, personal skill, who knows the reason? A quirk so fickle, it suits them. All for One chuckled, shaking his head. I thought you would like to know more about Japan's #1 hero, and deserve to know. If you want a word of advice, stay clear of him for now. You might be able to take them, but the world would get quite touchy if you messed with their precious symbol. Quote. That's all he is anymore, isn't he? Just a symbol, not a hero anymore. The light in his eyes was growing dimmer, still thinking of the moment. All for One didn't need to use any of his mind-reading quirks to know he was still thinking of that moment on that rooftop. The day that he met and lost his idol. If All for One inspired his own biggest problem in One for All Might inspired his with just a few hypocritical and thoughtless words. The boy had once met this truth before, and turned away from it, becoming a vigilante. Now, he was staring straight through the truth. All for One hated One for All, Shigaraki hated society, but the thing in front of him had all its hatred focused on a single person. All for One stepped in to make sure his son wouldn't do anything reckless when he did find out about All Might's little secret. Quote. The items will be done within a week. Ronin reformed himself, bowing from the waist and walking away. Until we meet again. Send him home, Kurogiri. He watched his boy leave, unsure of what words of comfort he should say, and so he said nothing at all. He couldn't just believe the #1 villain, so he ran home and started researching. There were no records of the name Toshinori Yagi before UA, and his quirk information was never released. To add validity, a hero student named Mirio had suddenly developed super strength alongside his old quirk which allowed him to phase through matter. No one batted an eye, but it seemed total bullshit from an outside perspective. He just developed the same level of strength as All Might. Who the fuck would believe that? The masses, that's who. He shook his head reading it over, already believed to be the next #1 hero. All Might wasn't even retired, and the public didn't know that he'd be soon, and already his position was getting challenged. Sort of. Anyone who thought he was going to be the next #1 hero might be right, but anyone who thought he'd replace All Might was high out of their mind on the hype. Midoriya had to calm himself down, he was so tense his shoulder felt like it was going to rip itself off. He rubbed it while slowing down his breathing, closing his eyes, and helplessly dragged back to that moment. The first time in so long he opened up, hoping that he of all people could give him advice, just to get kicked down. Now that he knew the truth, it no longer disheartened him. It pissed him off. All Might, the world's greatest hero, was born quirkless and had the fucking balls to tell him you couldn't be a hero without a quirk. He wasn't looking out for him, he thought it was impossible because he couldn't do it, the egotistical jackass. He forced his breathing to slow down, creating something between a snarl and a hiss. Wouldn't help to get pissy, not with this shoulder. He'd need to rest, he needed to heal so he could keep going. He'd work on his equipment. That jackass thought a quirkless person couldn't be a hero. Fuck, that shit wasn't hard. Just took a little violence and follow some stupid rules. He didn't even need his equipment to do that. He should just wait it out. His shoulder would heal, he could return to vigilantism, and then he'd be free to cut loose. He should work on the items he agreed to make for all for one. Crafting the possessed items would be easy, barely worth his full attention. What was difficult though, and required some actual effort, would be taking down those criminals he'd been chasing around in circles as ranger. He'd been chasing those fucking human traffickers for long enough. It was time to hunt them down, like the shit stains they were. He had the perfect weapon to use to send them to God, and it wasn't some easy shit like getting free super strength, all might. Wasn't going to be with a big fuck-off cannon or some stupid guns either. The beast rose, still moving with practically a snarl. His shoulder hurt, his head was killing him, and he was pissed off. He'd been holding back for long enough. It was time to see what he could really do to those fuckers. He didn't even need to go out to get the materials for all for one's newest creations. None of the things he was requested to make were rare, or even difficult. A knife, a belt, the weirdest one was a gas mask, and that one was mostly pre-built. All he had to do was modify it a bit, wouldn't even take a whole day. He started with the one he was the most familiar with, the knife. Heat, hammer, and sharpen a giant fang until it became a blade, add a handle and throw in the circuitry. The hardest part was balancing it. The button became a slider, so it could be locked in the on and off position in case you threw it. Didn't even take 3 hours since it was a quick job, and he wasn't exactly trying to make a masterful weapon here. The hardest part of the whole thing was turning the mostly pre-made blade into a real blade. The handle and circuitry were bare bones and simple, barely requiring anything more complicated than 2 screws to hold it together since some mook was going to use this, and replacing the battery had to be easy. The switch was even easier to work with than the buttons he used for his own weapons. Then he got to go out with his mom. They didn't play sports with Midoriya's injured shoulder but walked around the city, window shopping. He could see where the less legal parts of town started, an area coated in garbage, both the figurative and literal meaning. His eyes lingered on it, and the fakes roaming around when there was no crime in sight. Nothing happened in the day. Being here now was pointless. After that, they watched a movie. It wasn't his thing, since he had to sit back quietly and not mumble for over an hour, but he put up with it since his mom liked it. Managed to squeeze in the best nap he'd had in forever at least. After that, they went home and ate an early dinner, breaking off to do their own things. Midoriya's smile slid off as he rolled his shoulder, grabbing his sports tape and re-wrapping his arm. He kept massaging it, trying to use it as little as possible as he got back into working it. He hadn't been putting any strain on it, just moving it around. He wouldn't do anything yet. He had to push out the rest of those pieces for all for one. He went with the mask since he could hide most of the ugly parts on the inside. He tried to make it small, but that was mostly just practice for the final piece. It was a gas mask he'd modify so that it could become a possessed item, and he already knew where the pieces were gonna go. He checked the piece, marveling at just how old this thing had to be, then took it apart to find the pieces he'd be replacing. He practiced disassembling and reassembling it until he could pick which parts would be best to switch out. The complete mask included a long tube that would attach to a gas tank, but he was missing that part, so he just had to imagine it was there. Since he didn't want to actually make the mask useless, he just avoided the mouthpiece of the mask. Didn't want to fuck over whoever was wearing the thing after all. After adding a layer of material inside the mask, he looked at his handiwork. Making all the items was going to be a breeze. Now, he needed to create his. What, 5th jacket? It was getting hard to keep track of how many jackets he'd gone through at this point. He could also throw in an update to one of his weapons. Maybe he'd lead with that weapon update. He checked the time, then shook his head, laughing. Time had cooled his head, but he did need to practice a weapon. He only had 2 styles that only used one hand, and he only had faith in one of them. The needles might annoy opponents, but they were too weak. Without his parkour, he'd be unable to win. That left him with one style. A power that didn't need style or accuracy. It used momentum and strength, and while his right might be too weak, his left and legs would carry the weight. He stretched one last time, then gave the desk a glance. Ranger's costume was just filler, this new costume would test new things he wanted to develop. His helmet had been left alone for too long. He shut his notes, stretching for bed. Tomorrow, he has a lot of work to do, and he couldn't allow himself to be tired. He'd need to face the day with his best and demonstrate his worst. He tried to meditate, but with his once idle thoughts clouded by a hypocrite, his calm breathing became snarling, focusing his anger and indignation into a beast's breath. Chapter End Notes. The sugar crash is starting to catch up with me, I just stared at a wall for 15 minutes in pain. Might have to change my sleep schedule a bit, or stop cramming my schedule. Oh well, yo yiggity yo, I am literally dead and have no energy. I'll post this, and if I remember later, I'm gonna put something funny here. God bless y'all, and whoever the hell discovered acetaminophen. Chapter 87. Chapter Summary. Midoriya at Ronin is having an interesting life experience while building more weapons. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. After his work on creating possessed items yesterday, he only had one more he needed to make for all for one, and then the ones he wanted to make for himself. It was Monday, and since they just finished finals, he had some time off to himself for the summer. Naturally, he took all that freedom and free time and shoved it into the never-ending pit that was vigilantism. He woke up, cleaned up, and stretched. After getting some food, he delved straight into making the next thing on the list, a belt. Well, a belt was a strong word. It wasn't supposed to hold anything up like his sword belt, just wrap around the waist and activate when you pushed a button. Made this really easy. The belt was made to stretch, and all the tech was shoved into the belt buckle. The belt part took 10 minutes to cut, the buckle took 3 hours. Throw in another 20 minutes to put it together and make it pretty, and the project was done. He put each of the finished products into their own package, labeled so they wouldn't get mixed up when he got around to sending them out. After giving his products a once-over, he moved on to the stuff he'd actually use, like the cannabo. He took out the 2 pieces of wood, checking their condition, and got to work patching it up the best he could. It wasn't much, just patching bits of wood and adjusting the studs, but every bit helped. Having finished his brief maintenance, he shipped out himself to get a few quick parts. His ranger outfit had been fun, sure, but it was just decoration with no real point. This time, he wanted to experiment around and test some new ideas. If they were good enough, he'd carry them back over to the main costume. Midoriya disappeared, but instead of using Ken, he used the third disguise again, the one he used once and then never again while hunting gang hideouts. This one completely hid his face behind what looked like skin, making him look like he had some sort of faceless quirk. He adopted Bakugo's old delinquent gait, but other than that, he didn't change anything else. With his face gone and his entire stance changed, he looked like a completely different person. This faceless person went down and out to the stores. Didn't want to connect this to Ronin or Ken. He picked up the materials to experiment with his new costume. A large wooden mask, hair, and padding for the headpiece. This was going to be as minimalistic as possible, relying on as much skill as possible. Back in the club room, he put it together. The mask was cut and repainted to become smaller, while the thickness remained the same. It needed to be thick for the abuse he'd put it through. The hair was sewn on, attached with threads and glue. The padding was added afterward, trapping some of the hair between itself and the hard mask to better seal them together. He adjusted the straps, picking it up and checking the time. It was only 2 in the afternoon, too early. He'd wait, patiently and quietly, for a better chance. Sleep now for the hunt later. He packed up, heading home to ready himself for the last step before the hunt. Inko didn't know where he was going to go, just that he was going to stay at a friend's house for the night. She waved Izuku goodbye at 7, smiling, glad he was so active and had so many good friends. This was the second time he had done this since transferring to Ishiyama. She thought it was a bad school, but seeing the impact it had on him, she felt a lot safer about sending him for another semester. Izuku smiled, waving goodbye with his left, his backpack full of things over his shoulders. He was bringing an awful lot, but it was only his second sleepover. She shook her head, wondering if she should check in with Mitsuki. It had been a while since they talked, she might as well. It had to wait for the red light district to really come alive. Come too early, no one was there. Came too late, well, you couldn't really come too late unless it was morning. It moved through the crowds, resting the kanabo against its neck. The bandaging helped the muscles, but it wasn't going to rely on its right arm anyway. It wouldn't need to. Among the freak shows that came out at night, the beast fit right in. A few people probably tried to nab its stuff, but all it was carrying was that big heavy bat. Didn't even have a shirt to steal this time. The beast moved down the streets, stopping outside of a gambling den, checking the gang signs for a match. It stepped into the alley for a better look, stepping right into the open arms of 2 men, both armed and smiling widely at him. "Aye piggy, ya lost." They were both missing a finger, meaning they were part of some Yakuza gang. Didn't know they still existed, and cared less than it knew. The right shoulder rolled, seeing how good it was to hit the 2. Shit man, this guy probably don't even got any money. Look at this fucker. One stepped up to shove him, and that's when the beast's left arm darted out, grabbing him by the wrist, pulling him closer and slamming their heads together. The hard wood of the mask crashed into his skull, stunning its attacker for a second. The beast drove his foot into the man's shin, forcing his leg out and throwing him off balance. The second man had started to move forward, but he'd get his turn. The beast moved its head back, stepping back as the first man stumbled, then pulled them back together, dragging him forward again as he moved to tackle him, driving their foreheads together once again. His nose broke on the first hit, and the second sent him crashing to the ground. His skull bounced off the ground as the beast stood over him, standing boredly as the second man tried to punch him in the face. The punch turned his head and moved his mask. The restraints weren't good enough, and the mask was too weak. 2 hits. If the mask was steel, it would have only taken 1. It turned to the next man, who had taken a step back and had his hands up like he wanted to wrestle. Wrestle. It could wrestle. The kanabo was still resting against its shoulder as it advanced, stopping only to kick the downed Yakuza in the side of the head, rolling him out of the way. From there, the beast snarled as it continued advancing, rolling its shoulder again to warm up for the attack. The Yakuza had the good sense to try and grab his arms, but clearly wasn't paying enough attention to how his buddy hit the ground. As the Yakuza stepped forward, arms out to try and outmuscle him, the beast's left snake through his, knocking one of them to the side as he charged. Savage Oni style. 5th form fuck it. It snarled, its left grabbing the opponent by the head and dragging him forward as it jumped, slamming their heads together. Die. The Yakuza was forced backward, stumbling and dazed from the heavy impact. The beast's leg sprung out, sweeping the Yakuza's out from under him, knocking him onto his ass. You son of a bitch. You think you can get away with the A? Aye. The beast grabbed the kanabo with both hands, bringing it overhead while raising the lead leg. That front leg stomped down, building momentum. The back leg was pushed off the ground, building momentum. The body leaned forward, building momentum. The arms raised the kanabo overhead, turning all that momentum into power. From outside the alleyway, you could still hear his screams as his ribs were shattered with hit after hit. It was a long night, and it wasn't going to slow down at the first sign of bitches. It checked the graffiti of gang logos and turfs again, looked around, and walked into that gambling den. Hey, how'd you get in? Crack. Never thought the Yakuza would invite us in to help. Detective Tsukuchi's partner joked, standing outside the alleyway. Yeah, with all these snapped limbs, looks like knuckle dusters in the area. Limbs were pulled out of sockets, ribs were shattered, legs were snapped. Even if it wasn't knuckle duster, whoever did this was pretty pissed. Doctors and reports say some of these broken limbs happened after they passed out. Tsukuchi's partner traded photos with him, shaking his head. Did they do this barehanded? That takes some muscle. Did anyone wake up to give us a description of the perp? If they have, they left us out of the loop. Come on, we've got a job to do. Tsukuchi led them in, marveling at the scene. Everything inside was broken. There were signs of quirk use, bloodstains, and the police couldn't even be sure what was from the perp from what was the norm for this dump. This would be a lot of work. Tsukuchi gave his orders to the police, moving inside as a figure walked past the alleyway, only sparing a moment to look over the scene. It snorted from underneath the mask, watching useless heroes standing around, looking important while doing jack shit. The mask was still dripping red slowly from the last headbutt. If this was the only place they found, these idiots might never catch up with him. He slowly unwrapped his arm, moving it in slow circles. 3 people had grabbed it during their fights, but there wasn't any major damage. It slowly rose and fell as he tested his limits, leaving the bandages off as he stretched his body. He began meditating again, still using the third breathing style. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The air caught on his slightly tense vocal cords, creating the snarling sound. His mind was only focused on the fights of the day, picking apart everything he did wrong. His mind's eye allowed him to pick everything he did apart, thinking it through and finding new ways to tear through his next victims. Ranger had been too flashy, too slow, and too weak. The guns didn't have the impact to take down the trafficking ring. Now, he would. He'd tear them down, stop standing around so much, and crush them. He'd been so busy running away, he was just wasting time. He couldn't just take down the human trafficking, he'd have to rip everything apart. He finished meditating, putting away these thoughts for another time. He'd need to sleep if he wanted to keep hunting through the night. He went to bed, giving the mask one last look before he drifted away. The Ona's eyes stared back at him, tusks still coated with bits of blood that wiped down mist, grinning as it waited for the next fight. Well, we figured out whoever this was, it wasn't Knuckle Duster. Sukichi's partner was sitting back in his chair, waiting for Sukichi to come back from another meeting with All Might and his new protege. His partner didn't know what the meetings were for, just that they happened regularly and Sir Night Eye was involved. Really? Do we know who it was? Sukichi's partner shook his head. Just that Knuckle Duster was 60 minutes north at the time, knocking out a drug dealer's teeth. The report we got on the guy makes them seem new, or at least under a new identity. Familiar quirk? Nope, generic quirk. Hard head, increased strength, and a side effect of a weird snarling voice. The victims who just woke up were thinking it's some kind of pig mutation quirk. Not a clue how reliable they are though. Quote. A pig mutation, and we can't get a solid ID on the guy. Did you search for people with that quirk? His partner nodded and handed him the files. 6th page, shows a picture that one of the victims identified as the perp. Sukichi flipped through, looking it over. Looked pretty big at first glance. Muscular. Wasn't wearing a shirt, but they didn't have any injuries, and with how many people they got into a fight with, that was impressive. Most of their back was covered by red hair. No. Is that? Yup. The subjects say that when he started this, he had white hair. Quote. Damn. We just discovered that this wasn't his only stop last night. That might be the real reason the Yakuza went to us for this, his pace is insane. His partner left him to stew on that and read through the profile while he got them both coffee. Quote. Is this really only one person? It seemed insane. Their outfit had no practical defense, just a set of baggy pants, some shoes, and bandages around both shoulders. They said he started with the bandages though, so maybe they went somewhere before all of this to get those injuries. They didn't seem to slow them down at all, so another idea was that they were covering tattoos. The most interesting thing was what he couldn't see, the perp's face. The perpetrator walked past the camera with their back turned and never looked back, according to the report. He'd have to check the footage in person though to make sure it was true. His partner came back, handing him his cup. Ready to interview some of them yourself. These reports might be pretty faulty without you. They might think they are true. The limits of Sukichi's quirk was that the targets only had to believe what they were saying was true. Perspective messed with it, and from what he could see, these guys might have been as honest as politicians and it wouldn't make a lick of difference. No matter how much they lied, they didn't know anything helpful. Work on this person's motive. They had a string of targets, find a related element. Beat you to that too. Did you just read the first page? Wouldn't want to deprive you of your speech. Sukichi took the new papers from his partner as he continued speaking. All the same gang, the Iron Brands. Same one Ranger and Ronin were hunting. Quote. Ranger and Ronin. Shit. He just got a report from All Might on the firepower Ranger was packing and Ronin was Ronin. That did lead to a new problem. Quote. Hey, there's a league of villains and an association of heroes. You don't think? There's a group of vigilantes. He shrugged. Not our problem. That's a mess for the heroes to sweep up. We just gotta find them all. You do have to admit, it's a wild variety of people. His partner leaned back into his chair, staring into his coffee. All starting with R, but each with their own signature style. Ronin's swordsmanship, Ranger's marksmanship, and whatever the hell you call this new guy's shtick. Think we get to come up with his name, or the Heroes Association going to steal that from us again? Focus. This new group, if it's real, could be quite dangerous. None of them had ever been active at the same time. Yet, if they started working together, it'd be difficult to deal with them. This is just a theory right now, but we'll probably be setting out a search team for him. Quote. We're already doing that, aren't we? Page 9. Quote. Got it. The wooden mask was chipped and now reinforced with metal. He adjusted the padding and straps so it'd be harder to knock aside. He thoroughly cleaned the mask, then gave it the once over. He had redone the eyes. Visibility was always a problem when wearing a mask, it was just a question of how bad the problem was. After such a large experiment, he had a lot of data to work with on how to improve the first design. He added more padding to the forehead, adjusting as he tried it on. Many different versions went by in one day as he adjusted the design, only stopping when it was satisfying, not when it was acceptable. Checking the time, he sent one last message to his mother before completely descending into the beast. It wrapped both shoulders, moving its arms to make sure there were no problems, and standing up. It picked up the canobo, wandering back out into the night, ready and excited for another chance to show off just what some quirkless bastard could do. Chapter End Notes. Yo, the so far most brutal side of vigilantism, acting like Knuckle Duster himself. The beast's first fight. The man got his, now the beast is racking up a few. While I could say what the man, the beast, and the final person in the dreams represent, guessing games are fun. I remember some comments wondering if Ronin was just gonna sit back and make tons of weapons, that he should focus less on making more weapons and work with what he's got. Hope this was a good response to those comments. My editor pointed out that the goon we see land a punch on the beast was the first real hit they've taken in forever, or at least the heaviest blow anyone other than himself has dealt. We're gonna start seeing the differences in fighting style now. Still haven't read Vigilantes, I'll get around it I swear. My editor talks a lot about Knuckle Duster though, so I might have to read it just to learn more and better represent him. Tell me how I butchered him later. This took too long to write, and I don't know why it took so long. Oh well, see you when I'm done procrastinating. Chapter 88. Chapter Summary. Finishing what Ranger couldn't start, the beast rampages. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The streets were crowded even at this hour, but the alley was quiet and motionless. The wind swept through the alley, blowing the garbage and covering some of the bodies with trash. It was cloudy with a slight drizzle, making the ground slick and shiny as it washed away the blood. The murmur of people was loud, but with a keen ear you could just pick out the screams as it crushed its victims, bruising flesh and shattering bones. The tinkle of breaking glass as someone was shoved out a window, crashing in a pile of mangled limbs and glass. He was still screaming as something slowly descended the stairs inside the office building. It was walking slowly, working its right shoulder for the next hit. The man babbled as it approached, the thing still dripping with blood. Not even the rain could wash it all away as it walked over the shattered remains of a door, entering the mist and going straight for him without batting an eye at the surroundings. The mist made it hard to see what happened in that alleyway, what exactly caused all those screams and broken bones. When the police pulled in the next morning, it'd be their work to piece together what caused that mess. The beast dragged the escaping prey back by his ankle, ignoring the screams and scrape of nails on the floor. Its body twisted slightly, spinning to build momentum before throwing him into a countertop. He landed back first, trying to get his feet under him as a front kick struck him in the face, pushing him against the hard top of the counter. The victim tried to grab the counter, tried to keep on standing, but his hand missed, grabbing another man who had already been beaten into submission instead. His hand was slick with blood, making him lose his grip and slide down into the next kick. It forced him back, crushing him against the counter and the floor. Above him, the beast stood, massive as ever. Its left hand grabbed him by the hair, lifting him before throwing him back down into its knee. He was spitting blood on the first hit and losing teeth by the sixth. By the 11th, he was no longer conscious and got discarded like a ragdoll. It stood in the midst of all this carnage, detached. This was the 10th building tonight. The main problem it had with the mess was that its knee hurt now. It went back to the counter, prying out the cannibal out of what had once been the door, resting it on its shoulder as it walked out. This had been the third gambling house he'd broken into tonight, with the rest of the buildings being offices. Blood ran down the cannibal, pooling around its hand, but as it stepped into the rain it was all washed away. The rain had grown heavy since the start of these raids. The streets were mostly empty as the beast left the scene, its hollow eyes fixated dead ahead with a growing taste for carnage. The cannibal rested against its mane, dyed red from the night's work. It idly checked the time, then laughed. It could squeeze in a few more fights tonight. On the surface, nothing Ronin ever did changed anything. To the average Joe Schmoy, Ranger didn't change anything. But from the common man to the politicians, everyone knew of the monster that hunted Yakuza at night. The news started posting pictures of its rampage. Limbs snapped like twigs, blood splatters repainting halls, the buildings and people the Yakuza hunter had crushed, broken in its rampage. Tsukuchi shook his head as he looked over the pictures. Yakuza hunter wasn't lethal like the other villains, but it was more destructive by leaps and bounds. Not just Yakuzas, tables, doors, almost anything that could be hit was broken, smashed to pieces. The villain had been steadily escalating. From just a few broken bruises to sending all his victims to the hospital. They couldn't speak properly, talking about some strange giant with a club who shattered men by just walking into them. Tsukuchi's partner came back with their coffee, sliding him a glass. Quote. You're not still worried about him, are you? He only targets gangs. Doesn't even kill them. He hasn't killed anyone yet. Who knows when he crosses the line? They had nailed down his time of operation, his targets, and his method of entry. They had stationed police and a few heroes around to try and arrest him tonight. That's a problem for the heroes, Tsukuchi. What are we supposed to do against that? He pointed with his mug to the centerpiece of Yakuza hunter's work, a man laying on a small table, all of his limbs snapped. Bone was sticking out at some places, and the man had passed out from the pain, still groaning. However, opposed to the violent beatdown, someone had given this unfortunate man medical attention. It didn't look pretty, but someone had made sure nobody here was biting the dust tonight. In a single week, Yakuza hunter had changed everything. The crime rate dropped to an all-time low as it hunted, sending weaker criminals running in fear and having stronger villains pulling in their resources and trying to assess the threat. Quote. The police couldn't use their quirks. Some detectives had guns at least, but not even all of them, and not a single police officer did. Against a monster like Yakuza hunter, they wouldn't last long. Some of its previous victims were out of his league, but every one of them was twisted and broken like dolls. Whoever know, whatever Yakuza hunter was, it was dangerous. Normal people never stood a chance. The beast screamed as it charged with a knife in its back, lifting its attacker off the ground with what looked like a football tackle, crashing into a wall before taking a step back. The attacker was barely dazed as the beast stepped back in, body twisting as a kick struck the man's jaw, dislocating at his heel met cheek. He screamed and stumbled to the side, but was dragged back into position. The fear in his eyes was palpable, and it was delicious. The beast was smiling as its left came up, clubbing the man upside the head. He tried to get away, but the beast just kept tearing him apart, throwing him into that wall over and over. By the time it was finished, both its hands in the walls had a red paint job. It huffed, smiling down at its battered victim, then took the knife out of its back, rolling its shoulder to check for any major injuries. Die you bastard tilde. A new victim charged from the shadows, just when it thought the fun was over. He charged in, holding his bat overhead as he came in, screaming his throat out. The beast's grin spread from ear to ear, showing some of his red-stained teeth beneath the mouth of his mask. He brought the bat down, hitting that monster straight in the head dead on. The shock of the impact traveled up his arms, it should have been a good hit. But the beast didn't flinch. It didn't even try to dodge. It chuckled, tossing the knife to one side, then extended a finger, gesturing for him to come forward. He stepped in again, throwing attack after attack. The beast took every hit, and after the first 5 hits, he was sure of it. It was laughing. Die, die, why won't you die? He was crying as the bat struck the mask again, snapping in two. He swung 2 more times before he realized he was missing most of his weapon, looking down dully and blinking. The beast picked up the piece of the bat that had snapped off. A wooden bat. A metal bat wouldn't have done this, it would have just bent. Poor choice of weaponry. Oh well, it was too late for him. Quote. Please. No. The man took a step back, dropping what remained of the bat before turning to run. The beast swept his feet with a single kick, hooking both easily. Practice made perfect, and the beast never stopped practicing these days. It loomed over him, smiling behind its mask. The final prey crawled away, picking up the leg of a table to try and defend himself. The leg of a table that the beast had already broken, grabbing someone by the head and ramming them face first into over and over until he shut up and stopped screaming. Until that previous victim stopped moving entirely. It grinned at the memory, adjusting its grip on the broken bat piece as it moved in. The man tried to stab with the broken table leg, getting it in the gut. Instead of flinching though, its right hand locked onto the table leg, making sure this guy couldn't dodge as it began stabbing, laughing. They thought they could get away with this shit. They thought it was some weakling who would give up at the first sign of pain. Who the hell did they think it was? The beast rose, still laughing and now drenched in blood, looking down at the barely conscious victim. Any further and he might die, and nobody wanted that. The suffering would stop if he died. It stood in the midst of the carnage, glancing around the room as it dripped in blood. Ronin would have taken twice as long to get these results, and only God knows how long it would have taken if he kept trying to use Ranger. This was the best method for winning, efficient and powerful. It capitalized on the fear they created, unlike the rest who did nothing. The beast snorted, then picked up its prized cannibal. It walked out of the office, not giving the police officers it beat into submission a second glance. Those weaklings and fakes tried to stop him, tried to defend criminals. Heroes didn't protect criminals. Villains did. It was a hot humid night, and all this blood was making the beast quite sticky. It walked under the stars, moving quietly as it prepared for the next target. Those police fuckers who sat on the sidelines with their feet up their asses wanted to try and stop it. Let them come. I'll break them, like I've broken everything else. Everyone was gathered up at the final house. The Yakuza had been ordered to get out of the hideouts, and the final house was filled with heroes and police going over the incoming fight. None of the heroes were very worried. Yakuza Hunter has some kind of big quirk. What could he do against them? The police were taking this a little more seriously. They knew that Yakuza Hunter wouldn't so much as bat an eye at beating them into a pulp, like he did everything else. He was ravenous, hitting and smashing everything in his way. They were each focused on themselves, barely trying to work together to bring him down. Everyone had their own plans, and there was barely any communication between the two sides. They shared a common enemy, and as far as they cared, that was it. I must advise you to take him seriously. Yakuza Hunter is to be considered an armed threat and a danger to everyone if he isn't captured. The guy with the stick. What's he going to do, knock us out with that baseball bat? One of the heroes laughed. Maybe he'll scream our ears out. You heard the audio. So much yelling. Another one laughed with him. They had never gotten working footage of Yakuza Hunter, but it seemed he didn't know how to break the microphones. He doesn't talk, that was the Yakuza's, that doesn't matter. The police were at their limit working with the unprofessionalism of the heroes. The heroes thought the police were taking one little villain a little too seriously. Lighten up everyone. One of the heroines patted everyone on the back, laughing. His name's Yakuza Hunter anyway. If he finds out about this, he'll just leave. Then we just gotta chase him down. He doesn't, we jump him. Either way, I'll make sure all he can do is sit back and laugh. Tap, 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 tap. The steps were slow and calm. The uniform it stole worked wonderfully, with no one looking closely at the extra officer. The clothes were still slightly bloody and dirty, torn from where they were ripped off. Tap, 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 tap. Closer and closer towards its victims. Its face was hidden, covered in fabric to fake a faceless quirk. It had scoured the building, already knowing that there was no Yakuza here. For hunting them, this was pointless. Tap, 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 tap. But these fake heroes and police thought it was stupid enough to fall for this shit. They were mocking him. Did they think it was some weak little shit like them who needed numbers and quirks to win, that it wouldn't crush them? It stood behind a hero, still talking with a stupid-ass smile on her face, barely aware of what was about to happen. It slowly grabbed the police baton the officers had, easing it out with a quiet smile. It didn't know who she was supposed to be, but just her levity and quirk misuse pissed it off. It moved behind her, rolling its shoulder. Ha-ha-hums. Joke, please ha-ha take this a little more seriously. The police tried to maintain their composure, but against Ms. Joke's quirk, it was near impossible. The others were swept in, laughing along. She took it a bit too far, some of them having to lean on things to stay standing. Behind her, the faceless figure snorted. It chuckled, then began to create its first sound. Quote. Hey. It was a crass sound, a deep laugh. She turned to look at the beast as it rose from a slouch, putting a hand on her shoulder to make sure it didn't miss. Her smile froze as it opened its mouth behind the thin cloth, the blood in its mouth seeping through and dyeing the face cover red. As its mouth and the red stain spread wider and wider, the blood-stained cloth began to snap, string by string. Beneath the mask was a dark mouth, dripping red with scarlet teeth. Blood and spittle ran down as it laughed, seeming to rip open its own face to laugh as the baton came down on her head. The first hit staggered her, but most people didn't notice until the second, so caught up in their own laughter that they couldn't notice their surroundings. Its leg hooked hers, pulling her down as it swung with both hands, clubbing her upside the head. It was still laughing, still bearing those red teeth beneath a blank face. The police hat fell off as it moved, letting the white hair dyed scarlet fall gracefully as it battered her. This fake hero who couldn't understand the gravity of the situation until it was too late tried to stop him, but it was obvious she wasn't well trained in combat. She tried to block the beating with her arms, exposing her body. A vicious sidekick struck her ribs, punished her poor choice, its heel cracking her ribs and forcing her down. The heroes weren't prepared for the sudden attack and were stunned. The police wasted time with protocols. These weaklings would sit by and let this idiot die if it wanted. One strong kick to her head and her neck would snap, forcing her to pay for her disregard for the situation. The beast would have done it, still laughing all the while, but something tugged its foot away. It blamed the blowback it would get and the increase in the pursuers if it finally killed somebody. Whatever the reason, instead of stomping Ms. Joke's head into the ground inside the Yakuza's warehouse, it stomped on her ribs, crushing them with ease. Her howls of pain were like music to its ears, making it smile bigger and bigger. Yes, this is what it must have looked like when he was weak. When he was on the ground. Who would help her? Who would help him? Which one of these weaklings would be a hero? Son of a bitch. He's a shapeshifter. An arm cannon was raised at him, aimed to blow his head cleanly off. This wouldn't stop it from killing the idiot before it died though. This man didn't think things through. He was no hero. He was countered with a baton, which beat his arm to the side. The beast leapt off of Ms. Joke, tackling the gunner by the waist and lifting him off the ground. If this was Midoriya, he'd come up with some cheesy name for this move, but it was moving past that. The beast threw the man down while preemptively sweeping his legs. His ankles twisted, his body went sideways, and the last thing he saw was its foot, stomping on his face over and over before losing consciousness. The police tried to charge the beast as it stomped, still laughing. Its chest rose suddenly, then shrank in bursts as it laughed, working the core muscles to force the air out. Its whole body felt hot, wrapped in euphoria. The officers sprung forward all at once in a messy attack, slamming into the villain as a human wave. Feet were planted as per Savage Ona's third style, wall, but against so much force it could only slow down the advance. The beast was forced back as they struck him wildly, giving the others time to recuperate while they advanced. Old tactics needed to evolve. No more defending. He'd been playing defense this whole time, and look where it got him. Why would it keep going? Their batons struck its body rapidly, but they lacked something. They struck its bandaged arms, scarcely leaving so much as a mark as it was forced back one final step, breathing in. Muscles swelled and tensed, its body toughened through the past. The wounds that once held Midoriya back, the tattoos of Ronin's past, the mistakes of Ranger, it all became the emblem of the beast as it lowered its guard, welcoming the pain. It lowered its arms, accepting the incoming wave and tensing its body. They pressed into the monster, smothering themselves by moving in too close. With no room, they couldn't generate enough force to make any serious wounds. The beast stepped into the mess, breathing out slowly, creating a snarl as it opened both hands and latched onto the target in front of it, fingers wrapping around the first officer's throat and pulling him forward into a headbutt. They crashed together for a moment, the officer's own momentum added to the blow. Although the officer had more force behind his attack, the beast's defensive stature meant it was mostly reflected onto the officer. He was dazed as the beast stepped in front of his leg, one hand maintaining its crushing grip on his throat while the other grabbed his side, throwing him to one side as it advanced. They wanted to charge. It could charge too. The mess was made worse the moment one of the attackers was thrown to the side. Some of the officers had to either dodge the man or catch him while he flayed, succumbing to his instincts and making more of a mess instead of taking the hit and rolling out of it. With one instant to breathe, the beast's lungs swelled again. The red stain on its face was spreading, showing those teeth in their wide smile. What might have once had the chance to be heroic had been twisted into something villainous, a monster. The crimson mane flowed as it moved, outlining just how white the face usually was. Instead of using full blows, it used its elbows and knees, climbing onto its opponents as it fought. They flailed, their swings cramped while its hits always went straight into the opponent, and beyond. They were trying to hit the monster, but that monster was trying to hit straight through them. Due to the cramped quarters, only one of their wishes came true, with the beast's every hit striking forcibly one of the men, pushing them back. In only a few seconds the wave of men had been pushed and beaten to the side as the animal hunted. It was making a sound, something between a laugh and a snarl. It stepped off the fallen, using its parkour to quickly move around the room while crashing into the officers. Anyone who tried to get up was beaten down. Heads were grabbed and slammed into concrete. Legs were broken at the knee with a stomp and a sharp tug from the beast. Ribs were crushed with a series of hooks and kicks, forcing everyone onto the ground. There were many blows exchanged, slowly removing the shell of a human the beast wore. It ripped off the entire shirt, showing off the arm bandages it wore underneath and the cannabis tied to its back. It was hunched like an animal, ready to continue the hunt with its new breathing style. It looked over the fallen prey. The initial heroes who acted as individuals and couldn't help the group, putting aside their pride to win. The police who lacked the power to take it down. If one person had both sides' benefits, they could have played with the beast. It was slowly becoming clearer and clearer to the beast. Quote. Midoriya looked over the scene one last time as he finished applying the bandaging, taking a good hard look at the people he once admired and he was no patching up. He knew some of these people, had spent hours gaining info on them. Admired them, praised them as heroes, but really, they were just egotistical weaklings, playing a game they didn't know how to win. Quote. There are no heroes. Not anymore. Midoriya shook his head as he took out a mask from the stolen pants. He gave it one last look over before reattaching it to the wig, completely descending into the beast. Chapter End Notes. Yo Yagati yo, did I get the Rona? Is this story getting dropped? Where was I? Nope, just sitting at home being lazy and having a bad schedule. My editor can only work in the afternoons, and I write in the mornings. Bad matchup. Plus, I didn't write much for a while. Word of advice for writers, if you're feeling lazy, just make sure to always write a little every day. Even if it's just the notes that go on the end, write something and never miss a day. Because if you miss a day, it gets easier and easier to miss a day until you stop writing entirely. Always do a little work even if you have to only write one word a day. Just keep trucking. It sounds bad, I know, sounds like a way to burn yourself out. Guess what? You're gonna burn out. It's almost inevitable. To misquote my favorite publisher and combine it with a quote from my gym teacher, passion is usually what starts a story, but passion's like a fire. It'll burn out eventually. You can make it burn longer or shorter, but it will burn out eventually. At some point, the enthusiasm ends and determination has to be there to pick up the slack. You'll have passion at the beginning when it's new and exciting. You'll have excitement at the end when you're almost done and everything's coming together. But it takes discipline and focus to get through the middle when the beginning is just a memory and the end's not in sight. Set minor goals so you can motivate yourself with the little moments, like for me the current arc, the Beast arc. Get a hard schedule. I joke that I don't have a schedule, but I do. It's just not a publishing schedule. I write every day even if I don't publish what I write. Sometimes, I spend the day deleting what I wrote before and trying to make new stuff, one of the reasons this chapter took forever to get out. All I know is I need to write every day or I might stop entirely, and I at least want to hit triple digits for bragging rights. The original plan was the fanfic was going to go 50 chapters, then Ronin would die or retire. Didn't really care, this was a practice story for my other fanfic which I could focus on when this side project finished up. It'd be a little test that nobody would ever find, and I'd share it with some friends to get their opinions on this hot garbage. Obviously, that plan went up in smoke, and here we are at 88. Ronin's not dead well, physically dead, I haven't touched VU in a month, a lot of people found it and I wouldn't show most of my friends if someone put a gun to my head. Hope that advice makes some sense. I'm gonna edit this chapter later when my editor gets on. Enjoy the train wreck. Chapter 89, The Beast. Chapter Summary. Sleep. No sleeping, can't fight while sleeping. Eat. Skip it, makes it harder to fight. Hunt. Hunt. Hunt until you're dead. Rip and tear, until it is done. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. It held the mask up in the light, checking the metal and cushioning pieces for any wear and tear. The new design was holding up well, easily taking blows and dealing them out with just as much ease. It ran fingers through the now matted and brown hair, mumbling. It grabbed shampoo and conditioner, cleaning the hair with slow and deliberate movements. Its body was covered in bruises and cuts, but not a single one was major. 7 heroes, 12 police officers, and not one of them could overpower the beast, just like the weak fakes they really were. Always coasting along with just their quirks and the positions handed to them, never putting in any real effort to actually earn anything. To the beast, it seemed that natural talent stood no chance against hard work, but that might have been because those idiots never even heard of working. It held the mask up into the light, checking for any damage when Midoriya's phone rang. It checked the ID, Inko. It slapped on a smile and a nice little voice, giving her a few excuses before saying goodbye and hanging up. It had a lot of work to do, and it wouldn't be wasting a single moment away from the hunt. A handful of officials were sitting around a table, discussing the current villains and who was the biggest threat. A few old-timers came up, like the League of Villains, Muscular, and the local gangs. All for One was never mentioned, and even if they did, there was still no official confirmation that he was behind the League of Villains, especially with how inefficient they were. Ronin came up after the old villains as the most famous technically a villain but not the biggest problem at the moment. It was his second time being brought up at one of these meetings and marked a little over a year since he actually got serious. Nezu had provided practically all information on him and continued to keep an eye on him to this day. Ranger was barely mentioned, and even then, the AEC was talked about more than Ranger himself. After Ranger came Knuckle Duster, one of the last items on the list, and he naturally led to the next big issue. Currently identified as Yakuza Hunter, the second most violent criminal they talked about. He had attacked yet again last night, hitting almost 100 places in just under 10 days. The heroes they had sent to apprehend him weren't just beat, they were broken. He'd watch them try to stand up just to break their legs out from under them. He'd take their attacks to show how weak they were. He was a villain straight out of the Silver Age, standing comfortably right beside Muscular and Knuckle Duster. Nezu read through the reports as the topic shifted to Yakuza Hunter and all conversations turned into hushed tones, the room full of whispers with no real motion in any direction. The pictures spoke for them. There was so much blood, you could follow Yakuza Hunter's path just by the footprints. They were on the walls, the floors, the bodies, they were everywhere. It was like an animal tore through the place. The ambush was supposed to happen at a Yakuza warehouse. They had 7 people stationed, with some backup from the local police stations. More than enough to take care of most solo operating villains. It had seemed ridiculous that any more would be needed, but the inflated egos of the heroes recruited wouldn't allow any more heroes to get in on this and risk getting recognition for defeating the famed Yakuza Hunter. But in the end, they only had audio, but that was already enough. Ms. Joke must have used her quirk, but just by the sounds, you could pick out which one was him. It started like a snarl, deep and guttural before exploding as something, or someone, was struck repeatedly. They could picture the brutal impacts as the sounds played out and it was clear that the hunters had become the prey. They tried to react, tried to regroup, but all they could hear was that hideous laughter. Nezu could do the math, Ms. Joke would have either been dead or unconscious by now, meaning this laughter was genuine. The laughter that covered the exchange of blows as the heroes tried to stop him was genuine. Yakuza Hunter enjoyed this fight. Nezu had at first thought this was just another persona of Ronin. His fighting style didn't seem to use a quirk, focusing on martial arts and weapon usage. They both were highly mobile and created an atmosphere of fear through complete physical supremacy. But those were stylistic similarities. When it got down to the details, they were like night and day. Ronin's style was graceful, efficient, merciful. The least number of hits to take down his opponents. Yakuza Hunter just broke everything in front of him, an animal lashing out at anything that moves. No sign of grace, no shred of mercy as it broke men like a mountain breaks the waves. Reports and testimonies said Yakuza Hunter didn't try to dodge, just taking blows and laughing them off, before repaying them double. Ronin used tactics and skills that seemed to be completely foreign to Yakuza Hunter. He either lacked or didn't bother with precision. The monster had literally no weapon variety. And most of all, the most damning piece of evidence for them being different people was Ronin's advanced technology. Yakuza Hunter was beating everyone up with what was essentially an advanced baseball bat, while Ronin had tons of different toys. Teleporting swords, jackets that worked like armor, even his guns were advanced technology. The difference in firepower separated them. The bandages slowly wrapped around its body again, a slow work when you only had one good arm, but the extra length made it easy. It had a lot of bandaging, and there was some spare it didn't use. If it was going to start using its hands, it should increase its protection. It had been wrapping its hands up for a while now, but that was just with bandaging for protection against hurting itself. No, the bandages would just serve to give it the idea. Now, all it needed was some leather strips and a few metal studs. For students, summer was just getting started. It was just over a weekend and they were having the time of their lives. It seemed a great time, with laughs and joy all around. For the heroes, the summer slaughter was just getting started. Every broken body was worse than the last, with Yakuza Hunter outdoing himself on every victim. Maruko tapped her foot impatiently while Crust nervously checked his outfit again. It had only taken him one day to get there, but in that time, there had been 8 incidents of the Yakuza Hunter. 8 incidents in a single night. His work ethic put entire organizations to shame, and they actually got paid for their work. Yakuza Hunter only seemed to fight, never tiring, never slowing down, only getting more and more violent as he went on. So, should we pick a strategy? Crust wasn't nervous about the fight itself, but what it represented. His quirk was defensive and meant he wouldn't be at much risk for the whole fight. However, people with much better offensive quirks than him had gone against Yakuza Hunter and broken beneath his bat. He could only slow the villain down, with no chance of beating him on his own. PFT. Strategy. I'm gonna hit him until even thinking of moving is painful. Maruko was the problem. She was incredibly durable for some reason, but once again, Yakuza Hunter had dealt with that problem before. She was supposed to be the one to actually take him down while he blocked any attacks, but that'd require them to work together. You're just going to get in my way. Let's see how useful that stick of his is when I punt his head off. We're not supposed to kill him. Crust checked his mask, making sure it didn't slip over his eyes. We need to take him down and subdue him. Yeah, sure, whatever. She was definitely not going to follow any orders from the government. There was a good chance that this would be Yakuza Hunter's last hit ever. Maruko smirked as she stared out the window, already ready to smash the little porker when he showed his ugly mug. The bones seemed to be easier to snap every time. It had become routine, with the beast practicing exactly where to hit to best break them. It had pinned victims with a foot, then the Kanabo would make short work of them. But that was when they were on the ground. It could break people who were standing just as easily with a swing to the leg, letting their own body weight bring them down. It charged around them, moving with ease and no wasted movements, striking as efficiently as it could. The leg snapped under its victim, bringing him into the ground and setting up its signature finishing move, consecutive two-handed overhead strikes to the body. The current victim screamed as he was struck for the 20th time, another rib cracking. It was his fault for having a defensive mutation quirk. This would have been over sooner if he just laid down and accepted it, or never even joined these weaklings in the Yakuza. Another 13 hits before he stopped screaming, either because he was unconscious or because his throat gave out. The beast didn't care. It turned away from the final victim and moved on to the next site, already ready for the next fight. Ready for the next hunt. The next ambush happened inside a gambling den. It was quiet as the dead, with Crust being forced to give up on trying to plan with Maruko. She wouldn't listen anyway. Maruko stared outside the window, constantly fidgeting. She wasn't anxious, just excited. This victory wouldn't be that hard, but it would at least take some work. After losing to vigilantes so much, she wanted to prove to herself that she could at least beat one. Most heroes didn't figure that Yakuza Hunter had some connection to Ronin, but most people didn't know about the first time Ronin met Maruko, something not even Nezu knew. The time he'd broken her ankle with a bat, just like the one described by Yakuza Hunter's victims. Her leg tensed at just the thought of how her bones had cracked under the impact. She still remembered that hit, and she intended to pay it back someday. But much to her and her revenge's chagrin, Ronin had gone into hiding with his buddy, Ranger. Something about working on a gun, she didn't know and she cared even less than she knew. Yakuza Hunter was the current target, and she'd beat him until he spilled about the bat in Ronin. Hey, Shell Guy, he's here. It grabbed the first man by the head, its own momentum toppling the man and driving his head into the wall. The beast then swept his legs while shoving him forward, slamming him headfirst into the ground. 2 more stomps and he was down and done. It stood up, then immediately took a brick fist to the dome. There was no resistance, letting the hit turn its head before refocusing on the attacker. Big guy with stone hands. Unfortunately, metal would break those fancy rocks. He swung again, but his arm was caught by the beast mid-swing at the wrist. It pulled him forward, kicking him in the stomach once lightly before the same leg wormed its way between his legs within the same motion and swept the Yakuza's legs out from under him while controlling him with the hand it had caught. He crashed onto the ground as the beast dropped him and pulled back, grabbing the Kanabo with both hands before stepping back in and driving the metal studs into the Yakuza's body. He tried fruitlessly to get up but was promptly kicked onto his back as it wound up and delivered its second attack. The Kanabo hit almost exactly the same spot as before, wasting none of its energy as it worked to break the same ribs. The man tried to cover up with his arms, but that wouldn't make a difference. The beast would break those too. The third and fourth hit didn't do anything, but the fifth found purchase as the metal studs chipped off part of his arms. His gaze changed from confident to worried as he tried to stand up again just to be kicked down. The beast laughed beneath its mask, some of its hair already dyed from its labor. It wasn't just unconcerned, it was thrilled. It counted the hits until the man's arm snapped, laughter growing louder as the victim grew more and more frantic with every chip and crack. It shoved him between the floor and a wall, bringing the hits crashing down while laughing as he broke him apart, piece by piece. The reason it was going this far was the hero it saw, an idiotic weakling who couldn't so much as fight, let alone hide. Maruko had been peering out of the top window, and he knew how easy she was to provoke. He'd get her outside, then show her just how stupid that mess she called a fighting style really was. It rose the Kanabo again, breaking the first arm with what was now a satisfying crunch. Stop, villain. Crust was somehow the first one out, and got straight into the procedure. Step away. Crunch tilde. Yakuza Hunter didn't even acknowledge him, going straight on with hitting the already downed man. Crust opted to try and save this man by skipping formalities, shooting a shield at him while charging in. The beast barely batted an eye. Crust was on the better end of the fakes, practically a police officer. He made the right call, rushing and attacking. It could let him go. It stepped back to dodge his ranged attack and break away from the victim, giving itself some breathing room. Crust stood over the victim, defending him. If he tried to chase after the beast, it'd move past him and finish the job. Ironic, the men they brought to sell the story for their own ambush were the ones holding them back now. It kept moving backward, eyes trained on its potential third victim. Just because the weakling liked Crust didn't mean the beast did. It wouldn't hesitate to break him the second he got in the way. It backed to the entrance of the alleyway, eyes trained on Crust before she arrived. Don't bother with that guy. Seriously, we're here for him. Maruko didn't even give the man with 2 broken arms a second glance, jumping straight after Yakuza Hunter. Usually, when you had a team of heroes, you'd leave any victims with one while the rest chased. It seemed Crust had been giving the glamorous job this time. If she failed, he'd get flack for not helping her. If she succeeded, he'd get nothing for not being there. Crust sighed, wondering if he should have let this opportunity slide past him and into gang workers' hands. That guy was stuck at rank 10, he could use the publicity. The beast watched Maruko approach with eyes glazed over. Just the sight of her put it to sleep from boredom. She was weaker than Ronin, and Ronin was a weakling, inefficient, and unable to fully utilize what he'd been given. If it could break Ronin, it could break her. It fully focused on movement now, not really building distance as much as prolonging the encounter. It was late, so the streets were empty, leaving just 2 individuals. One was dressed in baggy pants that wouldn't get in the way of its kicks, bandages to brace its weaker arm, and a mask designed for heavy impacts which it incorporated into its fighting style. The other, well. Why did she still have those Bugs Bunny-looking backwood gloves? Where the hell were her pants or anything that would actually protect her? The white outfit shone even brighter than the beast's white bandaging in the moonlight, ensuring that it would never have a hard time finding her. Get back here, Yakuza Hunter. You're not getting into jail without a few bruises for what you've done. The things she was saying made as much sense as her outfit. It didn't want to go to jail, so if it didn't go to jail, she was saying it wouldn't get any bruises. She thought that line through as well as she thought through her garbage, fighting style. She kept up the chase and was gaining on him, but always overshooting when the beast would suddenly change direction. A skill it picked up from some green-haired weakling. Evading her was easy, and it kept track of the surroundings as they moved, checking against the time they spent moving further and further from the ambush spot. Soon enough, they had gotten far enough away, and Crust had no chance of catching them up. It'd break her before he even knew where they were. The beast turned on its heel yet again and charged in a new direction, letting Maruko overshoot and have to change directions to keep following it. If she knew how to run, like a normal person, she wouldn't have this problem. Her long legs meant she'd be good at running too, but no. Had to stick to the stupid rabbit stick and get outsmarted by basic turning. You can't run forever, so give up while my mood is good. The beast slowed to a sudden stop, letting her go straight over its head. She jumped right into the dead-end alleyway, stopping herself to look her opponent over. She was smiling confidently and still wasn't taking this entirely seriously. Quote. What, you think that this'll stop me? It adjusted its grip on the Kanabo. It had been holding it by the middle so it could run easier, but now its grip slid to the end as the head rested against its mane. The little rabbit was cornered but didn't even seem to care as she loudly boasted. It was bored, uninterested as she danced back and forth. Maruko looked over the strange figure, which shifted between being just as big, if not a little bit bigger than her to smaller than her, hunching over like an animal as it rested that bat on its shoulder. God, its face was ugly. She was between him and a wall, but she wasn't worried. She could easily jump out of here if she needed to. Yakuza Hanger or whatever his name was couldn't outrun her and had to keep switching directions to get this far, but that meant if he did anything stupid like blow the place up she'd get out of there faster than him. She smirked confidently as he adjusted his gait again, picking posture like some kind of model. Fancy stances wouldn't save him from the beating he was about to get as she forced the answers out of him. They might have stood there for a while, staring each other down like some dramatic anime characters, but that didn't suit either of their styles. As soon as the beast picked a posture it liked, it moved to break the little bunny in front of it and give her a taste of what real fighting looked like. As soon as Maruko found a good angle to attack from, she charged to beat this ugly bastard in front of her and get the answers she wanted. And they collided. Chapter End Notes. There once was a kid named Midoriya. Wonder what happened to that guy. Chapter 90, The Monster. Chapter Summary. The one that killed Midoriya. The one that broke Ronin. The one that never rests. Chapter Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Maruko leapt forward and spun, turning her entire body into a sideways kick. It swept cleanly through the air, a little too cleanly as the beast ducked under and shoved her to the side with its left arm, moving straight by her. Both turned to face their opponent again, the beast still crouched for a lower center of gravity. It kept a trophy of each of its victims, from the badges it had collected to the skills it had stolen. It was using one of those right now. Maruko led again, jumping into the fight with an axe kick that could easily crush a man. However, that weakling Midoriya had seen it 1,000 times, and immediately recognized the kick from before she even left the ground. A simple dash to one side easily avoided the attack. Maruko kept pushing forward, stepping in without jumping finally, and stringing her attacks together with a flurry of kicks. She no longer attacked with disconnected moves, leaving large gaps her opponent could rest between. But the beast hadn't needed the pauses and breaks in the fight, it could make its own. She planted her left leg as a base, only using her right to attack. That meant she'd need to break her attack chain to move forward or backward since she couldn't switch legs easily, stuck in her own foundation. It danced in and out of her range, making sure she kept the chain going while it found its opportunity. The moment her leg was almost fully extended and she was the most off balance, the iron grip of its left came down, grabbing onto her ankle as she tried to kick it. The weakling it had broken, Ronin, had learned a few things in all his little scuffles. One of those things was how to take down someone who kicked. With only one leg to balance on, sudden moves could make your opponent topple like a house of cards. Maruko was forced to her right and back, where her arms couldn't stop her fall. One of her legs was thrown upward, making her balance collapse as she fell. Removing the grip was as simple as throwing another kick. With her leg strength this idiot couldn't stop her once she got started. She did hit the ground but immediately pushed off with her arms alone, turning it into an attack as she jumped up with a kick at his face. It had been waiting for that kick. She didn't even look at what the beast had been doing before springing up and trying to attack. A better option would have been to roll to the side, but no, she had to keep on charging. People with no foresight had no place in the hunt, they were the hunted. It cut out the weak thoughts and advanced itself. It could see into the little rabbit's eyes, the wonder as she jumped up straight into the two-handed overhead lunging strike, which would have missed if she paid the least bit of attention and didn't jump back up immediately. Maruko jumped straight into the ugly bastard's attack and was forced to take its bat to her body, just missing her head through her own acrobatics. She was sent downward again, her momentum disrupted. She barely felt that weak of a strike though and just snarled. She pushed off the ground and spun her legs around her body to force everything nearby to move back and then, when she thought she was safe, she was struck. It struck by thrusting the kanabo under her spinning legs, hitting her in the body, and tipping her over. These minor hits lacked weight but served to keep disrupting her, tripping her, trapping her. She was knocked over, once again by a hit that was so weak she barely felt it. She had the good sense on the third try to stand up this time without trading blows, rolling away and putting her feet under her to try and stand up. It chased right after her as she tried to stand, shoulder checking her body while hooking her leg out from behind. The hunt was inglorious, cruel, and violent. No fancy tricks, just a battle of who was the better. She stumbled as it stuck to her, still too weak to do any real damage. She threw the leg it was wrapped around up, trying to send him flying, but instead of sending him flying he moved with her kick, negating some of the force. Twisting and elbowing her in return, keeping her constantly unbalanced. The beast cackled as she lost control again and tipped over again. If she couldn't even control herself, how could she hope to control the fight? She planted both feet and jumped into him, trying to body check him and banking on her durability. He still had that stupid crouch pose, stepping forward into her attack with a slight laugh as it moved right past again, barely touching her with its left as it pushed her away, ensuring it was safe. Once it was safe, it could counterattack. She hit the wall, breaking it with ease, and turned, pushing off the wall to attack again, jumping off, straight into the beast's open jaws. She kicked with both legs at the crouched figure who was swaying in the wind. Both legs moved to strike the villain's body and send him flying. She spun again, an idiotic move in a fight against an opponent of your caliber, and the little rabbit thought that she'd get away with it. It couldn't help smiling as she flipped, pointing both legs towards its body. Its feet pranced across the ground, stepping off to the side of her attack once again. Her legs extended, hitting where it had just been as it started the next attack. She blinked as the villain's sway turned into a slight sidestep. It was so minor, barely over a foot as it went sideways, raising that bad thing over her. For the first time, they met eyes. If a fight was supposed to be a conversation, this was the first time they exchanged names. She blinked up, eyes focusing as something welled up inside her as that bat came crashing down. She started to show the first signs of intelligence right as the kanabo crashed into her again, forcing her to the ground. With such little resistance, the hit didn't hurt that much, but it threw her off again and continued to cement its victory. The beast was in total control of itself, and thus, didn't need to control the battlefield. It had full control of its opponent now. Her eyes enticed it, amusing it as it hunted. Was this what those villains had seen as they played with their victims? What Bakugo had seen? Was this the thrill of the hunt? She was hit again by the bat, feeling the studs cut into her uniform and skin with just a slight pull. Her momentum carried her forward and down, bouncing off the ground and rolling to a stop. She breathed heavily, but instead of getting up, she looked into those eyes again. She'd seen a lot of things in her career inside her opponent's eyes. Fear, hopelessness, dread, all sorts of things. It couldn't hide its joy as she tried standing. The hunt was only as fun as what you hunted. A prey who didn't know when to give up was a great plaything. It advanced again, snarling to itself as it stared her down. It had seen so many expressions on those quirky bastards' faces through the weakling's eyes. Anger, pity, disgust. But now, he approached with complete calm. A fake smile slapped on its face, barely agitated breathing, and a slight swing in his step. This fight wasn't even hard if you could call it that. This whole thing was amusing for that thing. She was scared, just like that weakling Midoriya had always been. Agitated breathing, eyes constantly moving as she kept looking around, and a lack of response or reason. She was probably having to try for the first time in her life, and she didn't know how. How cute. God damn it. She forced herself to break eye contact and jumped up, charging straight at him. She could beat him. She could. No tactics, just a blind charge relying on power. Its face broke into a smile as it stepped forward into her charge, coming up from the ground. She came from above, meaning this hit would have her own weight behind it. Both hands went onto the kanabo. It was time to break this little rabbit. She leapt forward as it swung from a downward position, both exchanging strikes to the other's left leg. They disengaged and attacked again, her going for the body and it going for the leg again. It weaved underneath her kick as it struck her, moving right past her while constantly adjusting with small steps to face her. Maruko snarled, forcing the weird emotion down as she charged again. She was stronger, she could do this. Its hits barely hurt. Another exchange, with her hitting the creature in the left side as it hit her left leg again. Her kick threw the thing backward, dragging the newly sharpened metal edges across her leg and drawing blood as it left her range. She powered through, shouting as she entered its range once more, and kicked again. Coming close and kicking, over and over. Every time she swung, she either missed entirely or sent the thing flying. It never came to her, always letting her charge forward and build up momentum before exchanging attacks briefly, then moving away again. She chased him down, knocking him around once again but never managing to get him off his feet. It moved with the kick, jumping in the same direction the kick pushed it. This took away most of the impact and kept itself safe, while it used the sharpened studs on the kanabo to tear her apart, bit by bit. When the adrenaline was high, she'd be fine, but sooner or later that leg was going to give her problems. She was unfocused, flailing inside its clutches. Good.